Chapter 370. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. I remembered that when I first read about reincarnation in Buddhism, I wondered if I was the reincarnation of a historical figure, because my name was Zhou Yi. At that time, I wondered if I was the reincarnation of King, one of Zhou. I didn't expect to see a merchant ancestor who looked exactly like me. I had some knowledge about history, but the pre-Qin period was more like a myth than a history. I had no impression of the merchant ancestor. As for reincarnation, I didn't believe it at all. Although both Buddhism and Taoism had the theory of reincarnation, Taoism believed that reincarnation was fundamentally different from the reincarnation of the living Buddha in Buddhism. Zhang Tianshi believed that reincarnation was just a new carrier for the three corpses god. It was a sin of being possessed by an evil spirit. Even the relatively positive Chuanjian sect believed that reincarnation was just a process of the 6 paths of reincarnation, which was completely different from the so-called reincarnation of a virtuous eminent monk in Buddhism. Metaphysics was inherited from Taoism, and its theory was more inclined to Chuanjian sect. Similarly, there was no such thing as a virtuous person reincarnating and continuing to cultivate. If it wasn't reincarnation, then what was it? Was it just a coincidence? In the past, I would have believed it was a coincidence. However, after experiencing so many things, no matter how open-minded I was, I knew it couldn't be as simple as a coincidence. Just as I was deep in thought, Nangong suddenly called me softly. I turned to look at him, but he reached out and pointed at Zhang Kanwen, who was lying on the ground. I lowered my head and saw that Zhang Kanwen had opened his eyes at some point. I immediately put aside the chaotic thoughts in my mind and quickly asked him, "Brother Zhang, how are you feeling?" He seemed to have just woken up, and his eyes were not focused yet. After a while, his eyes showed some spirit. I hurriedly asked him again. Zhang Kanwen coughed and said with difficulty, "I'm okay. What's the situation now? Where are we?" I briefly told him what had happened after he had fainted. After hearing that Nangong and I had been captured and that our cultivations had been sealed, Zhang Kanwen said to me with some guilt, "It's all my fault. I was too impatient and implicated you." I shook my head and interrupted him. "What's the point of saying all this? Both of us are fine now, but you, on the other hand, suffered such a serious injury, especially in your chest and abdomen. I'm afraid your cultivation will also be affected." Hearing my words, Zhang Kanwen's expression darkened. If I could think of this problem, how could he not think of it? Back then, Lu Zhenyang's injuries were similar to his. Although he managed to preserve his life, he became a cripple. Although Zhang Kanwen's injuries were slightly lighter, once his heaven veins were damaged, his ending wouldn't be good either. Both of us were silent. In the end, Zhang Kanwen spoke first. "I can still faintly feel the presence of Dao Qi in my body. It shouldn't be the worst-case scenario. To be honest, I thought I was going to die. I didn't expect to be able to survive. I should be thankful." I pointed at President Gu, who was not far away. "President Gu's pills saved you. I didn't expect you to be friends with President Gu." "Friends?" Zhang Kanwen furrowed his eyebrows. "I'm not that close to him. Why did he save me?" I was stunned. I thought that there was some relationship between the two of them for President Gu to be willing to use elixirs to save his life. I didn't expect that they weren't close at all. Could it be that President Gu just cherished his talent? I shook my head. An old fox like him definitely wouldn't do something that wasn't beneficial to him. Who knew what he was planning? "Let's not talk about this for now. You should recuperate first. No matter what President Gu's motive is, he has expressed his goodwill. After we get out of here, he shouldn't make things difficult for you. At that time, with his care, you might be able to recover completely." I comforted Zhang Kanwen. Zhang Kanwen shook his head. His expression showed that he wasn't willing to give up. He said, "I came here because of my master's last words. If I leave with my tail between my legs, even if I fully recover after I get out of here, so what? The Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony is held once every 3 years. If I come again, it will be 3 years later. At that time, I don't even know if the sacrificial spirit will still be here. Most importantly, if it causes trouble in these 3 years, it will be my fault." Looking at his sorrowful face, I sighed. I didn't know what to say. He couldn't even take care of himself now, yet he was still thinking about his master. I didn't know if he was loyal or stupid. However, I understood him. Because the One Mountain branch didn't have many people, Zhang Kanwen had always been thinking about his master. Moreover, the tragic deaths of Zhao Leoi and Zhang Wenfei made Zhang Kanwen feel guilty. Rather than saying that he was extremely loyal to the Stone Gate, it would be better to say that he wanted to use this method to make up for his guilt toward Zhao Leoi. After a moment of silence, I opened my mouth and comforted him. Don't think about it for now. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let's talk about it later. Zhang Kanwen nodded. He seemed a little tired. He didn't say anything and closed his eyes to adjust his breathing. At this time, the three heavenly masters of the Taoist Association had woken up. They seemed to have something important to discuss. They walked over to the Metaphysics Association's side and whispered to President Gu. They discussed for more than 10 minutes. Finally, President Gu laughed and said, "President Run, don't worry. Although I can't make the decision, I believe the old president won't refuse. When the time comes, as long as the old president doesn't have any objections, you can do whatever you want." Hearing his words, President Ren sighed in relief. He smiled apologetically and said, "As long as this matter succeeds, the Taoist Association will pay any price. When the time comes, if President Gu needs anything, just say the word." Then, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. It was obvious that they had reached an agreement. After the discussion, President Ren suddenly turned to look at Nangong and me. His eyes were filled with intense hatred. That key belonged to the Taoist Association 6 years ago, but it was snatched away by the shamans. If it wasn't for the fact that the old president asked for it, I would have killed him today. I immediately understood. The Taoist Association had their eyes on Yi Maolon. From what he said, Yi Maolon should have belonged to the Taoist Association, but Nangong or someone else from the shaman tribe had snatched it away. I turned to look at Nangong. He was resting with his eyes closed. I didn't know if he hadn't heard what President Ren had said, or if he hadn't. I didn't ask him, but I was secretly anxious. Seeing that this matter was over, it was probably time for everyone to leave. Just now, Nangong had solemnly said that the two of us weren't people who would die young. However, if we can't find a way to escape in this royal tomb, we might not have a chance outside. What should we do now? I waited for a long time, but Nangong didn't seem to want to talk to me. In the end, I couldn't help but wake him up. "What do you plan to do?" He didn't look anxious at all. He smiled at me and said, "Don't panic. There are 4 gates for the spring sacrifice, and only 3 of them have opened. The 4th gate hasn't opened yet. They won't leave this place for a while. Just wait patiently. There will be a chance." After he said that, I remembered that President Gu and the others had mentioned something about the 3rd gate. From Nangong's words, it seemed that there was another gate to enter. I lifted my head and looked around. After searching for a long time, besides the gate that we had just entered, I didn't see any traces of other gates on the walls. Where's the 4th gate that he had mentioned? My doubts didn't linger long. Soon, I heard President Gu ask President Run of the Taoist Association, "The 4th gate is about to open. Brother Run, how is your recovery? That God, evil ghost, isn't weak. When the time comes, we will have to rely on our fellow Taoists' help." President Ren waved his hand. "I just lost some of my lifespan. As long as my origin isn't damaged, it's nothing. Brother Gu, don't worry. God, evil ghost. Is he talking about the well ghost for the spring sacrifice ceremony?" The well ghost had an god cultivation base, and it happened during the spring sacrifice ceremony. It couldn't be a coincidence that there would be another evil ghost with god cultivation base. Moreover, the Han family had occupied the true dragon vein, which the Metaphysics Association could use. They had a reason to eradicate the well ghost. This unexpected good news cheered me up. I hurried to wake up Zhang Kanwen, who was meditating. I told him what President Gu had just told me. Zhang Kanwen was elated when he heard that. He struggled to sit up and said, "I want to see President Gu for confirmation." With his current condition, of course, he couldn't find President Gu. Fortunately, President Gu saw Zhang Kanwen sitting up and proactively walked over to ask about his situation. Zhang Kanwen seized the chance to ask, President Gu gave me an affirmative answer. Then, he checked Jean Camlin's body and gave him some advice. Afterward, he got up and left. I'm going to prepare for the opening of the fourth gate. After he left, Jean Canwin heaved a sigh of relief. The wound on his chest seemed to have recovered a little. He sat cross-legged on the ground and didn't lie down again. I felt inexplicably nervous. This time, I had come with Jean Canwin to find out more about the well ghost. I wanted to know why he had behaved strangely toward me in Shenzhen. After the Metaphysics Association had captured me, I thought that I wouldn't have a chance. Who would have thought that the situation would change so quickly? The other forces had joined in. That well ghost was like a turtle in a jar, unable to escape. I just didn't know if President Gu would give me a chance to ask the well ghost. Chapter 371. While I was thinking, Jean Camwin suddenly asked me, "Zhou Yi, the evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation isn't ordinary. If we were to fight it head-on, we would have to waste a lot of effort. However, if we were to use the secret technique of my sect to deal with it, it would be much easier. Do you think I should tell President Gu about my sect's secret technique? This way, it'll be safer." I couldn't help but laugh. I shook my head and said, "Brother Zhang, you're too concerned. That sacrificial evil spirit is only at the Yin God realm. With our strength, it is indeed extremely difficult to deal with it head-on. But look at those people from the Metaphysics Association and Dragon Tiger Mountain. Almost all of them are Yang God, celestial masters. Not to mention, so many people, even President Gu alone, is more than enough to deal with that sacrificial evil spirit. Although the Yin spirit is at the same level as the Yang spirit, it has no power to fight against the Yang spirit. You can rest assured." Hearing that, Jean Kinwin grinned awkwardly and nodded, agreeing with my words. He didn't say anything else, but I suddenly thought of something. She once told me that she was also a Yin spirit. At that time, I knew nothing about the cultivation of the upper echelons of the Metaphysics Association. I thought that they were just ordinary masters. I even fantasized that if Tao Wu could come out of the Fire God Temple, he would be able to help me take revenge for the Liu family. Now, it seems that I was too naive. Although the Liu family celestial master did not have a Yang spirit cultivation, the fact that a family with 4 celestial masters was willing to be under the jurisdiction of the Metaphysics Association could only prove that the Metaphysics Association had the power to completely crush them. Moreover, the Liu family was not considered one of the top families under the jurisdiction of the Metaphysics Association. This showed how powerful the Metaphysics Association was. If I want to take revenge on the Liu family, the Metaphysics Association is destined to be involved. Nangong once said that as long as I reach the Celestial Master Realm, I will have the ability to defeat Liu Ziang. Therefore, I have always set the Celestial Master Realm as my goal. I thought that as long as I reached the Celestial Master Realm, I would be able to take revenge. But now, it seems that I have to obtain the Yang God Celestial Master. After realizing this, I couldn't help but feel discouraged. However, I quickly expelled the negative emotions from my heart. People can't deceive themselves. My parents were killed. Not to mention Yang Shun Celestial Master. Even if a real immortal stood in front of me, I wouldn't be able to turn back. I could only face the difficulties head-on. It was not a bad thing to recognize the enemy's strength as soon as possible. Being able to see divine, celestial master Chanyan's cultivation on this trip could be considered as a gain. Similarly, on the side of Longhu Mountain, the 3 celestial masters all had Yang spirit cultivation, and their strength was even more terrifying. As for the Taoist Association, I didn't care too much about it. Although the 3 celestial masters also had Yang spirit cultivation, from what they said, there should be no stronger person behind the Taoist Association. Behind the Metaphysics Association and Mount Longhu, there were 2 people leading these 2 forces. One was the old president, and the other was Celestial Master Zhang. President Gu and that Taoist Zhang are already the strongest people I know. I wonder what level the old president and Celestial Master Zhang's cultivation have reached. As far as I know, above the Celestial Master is the Yang God and the Yin God. If we go further up, there are no records in the Death Scripture. Based on my own observations, the young god celestial master, is almost the same as the immortals in the legends. If we go further up, I'm afraid it's only the Taoist legends of ascension and immortality. Of course, the old president and celestial master Zhang are still people living in the mortal world, so it is impossible for them to become immortals. However, with their cultivation, they should be almost the same as real immortals. It is said that immortals are elusive. From this point of view, the old president and celestial master Zhang really do have the demeanor of immortals. Ever since I arrived at the headquarters of the Metaphysics Society, I have interacted with the old president. I was even saved by him and stayed at his house. However, I have never seen him until now. It was the same for Celestial Master Zhang. As long as one was in the metaphysics world, there should be no one who didn't know about Celestial Master Zhang. However, the current Celestial Master Zhang had almost never shown his face. Not to mention me, an outsider, even Chen Yangting, who was the master of the Xian Altar Hall of the Celestial Master Mansion, who was killed by me before, had never heard about Celestial Master Zhang. Thinking of the old president, I couldn't help but sigh. The Metaphysics Association and I are naturally enemies. At this time, I am still their prisoner, but I can't tell if the old president is an enemy or a friend. Ever since I stepped onto the path of cultivation, the old president has helped me a lot. When he helped me repair all the meridians in my body, it could be said that he gave me a second life. At that time, I even regarded him as a family member. However, after my witchcraft cultivation was exposed, the Metaphysics Association and I became enemies. Since then, the old president has lost contact with me. Judging from the cruelty of the battle of witchcraft, the old president is naturally my enemy. However, when I escaped from the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association, I couldn't leave the 10 blazing stones that he gave me. This left me with some room for imagination. Honestly speaking, I don't want to be enemies with the old president. It's not only because of his immortal-like cultivation, but also because of the kindness I have shown him. As my mind was in a mess, I suddenly heard a voice from not far away. Everyone, the time has come. There is no longer any blood feed. We need to join hands to forcefully open the fourth door. Are you all prepared? I turned my head and saw that the one who spoke was President Gu. They should have already come to an agreement. The people from Mount Longhu, Taoist and Buddhist associations all stood up and agreed in unison. After President Gu expressed his gratitude, he suddenly took out a silver talisman and flicked his finger. The talisman flew a short distance to the center of the hall. It didn't fall to the ground, but instead slowly floated up into the air. It passed through the gaps of the 8 enormous chains in midair and rose to the top of the wall. It was as if it was glued to the wall and stuck tightly to the top. Immediately after, President Gu formed a hand seal with both hands and chanted several single-syllable spells. He flicked his finger again, and the spells, each with a different light, flew towards the silver talisman and fused with it, disappearing without a trace. At the same time, a brilliant white light burst out from the silver talisman. Then, the entire silver talisman seemed to melt and gradually disappeared. It was replaced by a silver liquid that spread along the top of the wall like molten silver water. In the end, it outlined a square frame that was about 10 meters square. It looked like a door. Could this be the fourth door that they were talking about? Just as I had this thought, President Gu solemnly opened his mouth and said to everyone, "Fellow Taoists, please guide your Tao energy into the area marked by the silver line." Following his words, a total of 18 celestial masters from the 4 factions started to form hand seals. In a split second, an incomparably terrifying aura of Tao energy filled the entire hall. Their celestial master level Tao energy was still in physical form. It formed a fluorescent white gas in the air and flew into the silver talisman frame. It looked extremely dazzling. At the start, I was only shocked. However, as they poured more and more Tao energy into the frame, I felt an incomparably huge pressure coming towards me. I couldn't even breathe as I stood on the ground. Even though the shaman Shi in my body had recovered to the glorious knowledge realm, I didn't dare to show it in front of President Gu and the others. Thus, I didn't dare to use my shaman Shi to protect my body. I could only grit my teeth and hold on, hoping that the process of opening the fourth door would end soon. The truth was out of my expectations. The difficulty of opening the fourth door was extremely high. Under the joint efforts of a total of 18 celestial masters, the terrifying Tao energy continued for several minutes, but they still couldn't open the door. At this moment, I was already unable to stand. My legs gave way, and I fell to the ground. Only then did I feel slightly better. Of course, the terrifying pressure still hadn't disappeared. Even though I was sitting, I could barely maintain my weak breathing. Not only was I unable to bear it, but Zhang Qianwen, who was at the side, had already collapsed on the ground. His mouth was wide open, and it was obvious that he was having a hard time breathing. His expression showed that he was in extreme pain. Only Nangong, who was at the side, was the same as before. He sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed. I couldn't tell that he was affected in any way. The little zombie was in a similar situation. He stood next to Nangong and looked even more relaxed, as though he wasn't affected at all. I was a little anxious. I was fine as my shaman chi had recovered quite a bit. If I couldn't bear it anymore, my shaman chi would automatically protect me. However, Zhang Qianwen was already heavily injured and couldn't bear the torment. If the celestial masters didn't stop in a short amount of time, he would be crushed to death by the Tao energy. I gritted my teeth and struggled to move my body. I half knelt and half crawled to Zhang Qianwen's side. I placed my hand on his shoulder and opened my eyes to observe his expression. I was already prepared. If Zhang Qianwen was in danger, I couldn't hide the shaman chi in my body anymore. I had to save Zhang Qianwen no matter what. Since President Gu and the others were using their full strength to deal with the fourth door, they wouldn't notice me. Even if they noticed me, the final result would be that they would place another seal on me. I hadn't expected to rely on my own power to escape. Fortunately, the worst-case scenario didn't happen. Just as Zhang Qianwen's eyes were about to roll back, there was a sound of rocks cracking from the top of the wall. Immediately after, the terrifying Tao energy in the surroundings disappeared. I took a few deep breaths. I didn't have time to look up and quickly lower my head to check on Zhang Qianwen's situation. He was also panting heavily. His chest was constantly heaving up and down. It was obvious that his wounds had been affected. His face showed that he was in pain, but his life was no longer in danger. Only then did I relax. I turned to look at the so-called fourth door. Before I could raise my head, there was a loud noise not far from me. I turned to look and saw that the coffin connected to the 8 chains above the main hall had fallen to the ground. Moreover, it wasn't just the coffin that had fallen, but the 8 chains and the huge rock that they were connected to had also fallen. When they hit the ground, there was another loud noise that made my ears go numb. Chapter 372. As soon as I had that thought, I saw that the falling rock was so big that it connected to the top of the wall. Moreover, there was a flight of stairs on one side of the rock that led to a square hole on the top of the wall. I understood that President Gu and the others hadn't failed. This was the fourth door. Sure enough, after the sound of the boulder falling subsided, President Gu quickly said in a clear voice, "Everyone, the fourth door has been opened, and the Yin God, evil ghost, should be entrenched above. Just now, when we opened the door, we consumed quite a bit of energy. Let's first recuperate and then enter to investigate. What do you all think?" He was an experienced man, so the others didn't object. They nodded and sat cross-legged to adjust their breathing. Perhaps President Gu's cultivation was exceptional, but he didn't adjust his breathing. Instead, he walked in front of me and lowered his head to look at Zhang Qianwen. He smiled apologetically. I was so focused on opening the fourth door that I forgot about you guys. "Qianwen, how are your injuries?" Zhang Qianwen was still panting, and he couldn't hide the pain on his face. Everyone could see that he wasn't in a good condition. However, he was a stubborn man. He didn't complain. He gritted his teeth and said in a trembling voice, "It's more important to kill the Yin God and evil ghost. I'm fine." Shaking his head, Guild Leader Gu took out another black pill and placed it in Zhang Qianwen's hand. Smiling, he said, "Even a person made of iron would not be able to endure such heavy injuries." Don't try to act tough. Eat this pill and rest well. Upon saying that, he turned to look at me. When we enter the fourth door, you'll bring Canwin with you and follow behind us. Take good care of him and don't make any mistakes. I didn't need him to tell me to do that. I didn't lift my head to look at him. I just nodded indifferently. President Gu didn't mind. He talked to Jean Canwin for a while, then turned around and left. After he left, Jean Canwin didn't hesitate and directly swallowed the pellet. The effect of the pill was very strong. After a short half a minute, the painful expression on his face completely disappeared, and his face became a lot rosier. He sat up from the ground and asked me with doubt, "When I was injured before, did Chairman Gu also help me heal with such concern?" I nodded. "That's right. Otherwise, why would I think that you have some sort of relationship with him?" Jean Canwin was even more puzzled. He turned around and looked at President Gu from afar. He frowned and pondered for a long time before shaking his head. Although I used to be a council member of the Metaphysics Society, I didn't have any interactions with President Gu. I didn't even speak much to him. It's really strange. I was also puzzled by President Gu's actions. However, I still advise Jean Canwin, it's not a bad thing. Don't worry about it. You should focus on digesting the power of the medicine and recover from your injuries. Jean Canwin nodded and retracted his gaze, not saying a word. Not long after, the Taoist masters opened their eyes one after another. It was obvious that their Taoist energy had fully recovered. After the last Taoist master from the Taoist Association stood up, President Gu pointed at the giant stone steps and said to everyone, "Fellow Taoists, since you've finished meditating, let's go in. Our Metaphysics Society will take the lead. Fellow Taoists from Mount Longhu and the Taoist Association will take the lead in the Central Army. Senior Buddhist brothers will take the rear. Do you have any objections?" His suggestion was very reliable, so the others didn't have anything to say. They all nodded in agreement. President Gu led the other 5 Taoist masters to the giant stone steps. At the same time, he beckoned Nangong and me to follow him. Jean Canwin couldn't wait to go up. I didn't dawdle and held him in my arms. I called the little zombie and followed Nangong. After we went up the steps, the 3 Taoist priests from Mount Longhu and the woman in my clothes followed us. The others also followed in order. After everyone had gone up the stairs, President Gu was the first to step up to the giant hole at the top of the wall with a vigilant look on his face. He stepped in front of the giant hole at the top of the wall. When we were in the hall, we lifted our heads to look at the giant hole on the wall. It was completely dark, and we couldn't see anything. However, when we got closer, we saw that the hole wasn't completely dark. There was a bright fluorescent light, but it wasn't as bright as the light on the wall. At this moment, the 6 Taoist masters of the Metaphysics Society had entered the giant hole. We didn't hear any noise, so it should be safe inside. I didn't stop. I carried Zhang, Canwon on my shoulder, and directly entered the hole. There was also a hall inside the giant hole. However, it seemed to isolate all sounds. As soon as I got in, I felt as if I had entered a new space. This feeling was similar to when I had searched for the Fire God Temple. I had to go in and out of the barrier that isolated the Fire God Temple. It was also similar to when I swam out of the water or when I entered the water from the outside. I lifted my head to look around. This place was much more exquisite than the hall below. There were countless stone sculptures everywhere. Huge stone pillars were erected between the ground and the wall. There were all kinds of strange animals and flowers carved on them. Besides that, there was a wide road in front of me. This road was different from the rest of the ground. It glowed with a white light, and it looked as if it was made of white jade. It was extremely luxurious. On both sides of the jadestone path, there were 2 objects that looked like copper furnaces placed opposite each other at regular intervals. There were even flames coming out of the furnaces. It looked exceptionally strange. Between the 2 bronze furnaces, there were countless human figures standing in rows. These human figures looked very small and seemed to be servants and maids who were bowing. These servant figures all had their heads lowered and were holding trays of the same style in their hands. Within the trays, one could clearly see roasted food and containers filled with various liquids. I was shocked. This was the Shang Dynasty's sacrificial hall. It had been there for several thousand years. Why did the roasted meat look golden and crisp? It looked as if it had just been roasted. Moreover, I could see that the liquid in the containers was still smoking. It looked as if it had just been cooked. What was even more inconceivable was that the servants holding the trays were wearing robes. Even after thousands of years, these clothes had not withered away. Instead, they were still glowing with different colors. It was truly a miraculous sight. Although everything here looked strange, I was still calm and didn't make a sound. Everything in the world of metaphysics couldn't be understood with common sense. For example, it wasn't rare for food and clothes to not rot after thousands of years. Even I could do it. As long as these things were placed next to the true dragon vein, they would be nourished by the true dragon vein's draconic energy. As long as the draconic energy didn't dry up, the food and clothes would naturally last for eternity. Of course, the true dragon vein was just one method. There were many other ways to achieve this. This was the Shang dynasty's sacrificial hall, and these strange things could only be considered ordinary. I gradually calmed down and lifted my foot, preparing to walk forward to look at the white jade road. However, as soon as I lifted my foot, I found that something was wrong. My legs didn't move forward. Instead, they were raised upwards. This wasn't because I was restrained by some power and couldn't move, but because I was actually sitting down at this moment. I hastily looked around. I didn't know where Zhang Kanwan, who was in my bosom, had disappeared. The people from the Metaphysics Association were nowhere to be seen. The people from Mount Longhu and the Taoist Association were nowhere to be seen. Even the giant hole and the giant stone staircase behind me had disappeared. Instead, there was a giant chair behind me. At this moment, I was sitting on an enormous chair. This chair was completely golden, as if it was made of gold. There were countless complicated patterns and inscriptions that I couldn't understand. The back of the chair was also engraved with mountains and rivers, as well as the sun, moon, and stars. It was incomparably luxurious and dazzling. As I looked at the chair, I couldn't help but feel that it was familiar. I recalled the mysterious person I had met in the Fire God Temple. He had also been sitting on an enormous chair. The style of the chair was extremely similar to the one I was sitting on. However, his chair was completely red and had a completely different color. I was extremely anxious and panicked. What was going on? Why was I suddenly sitting here? Where were the people from the Metaphysics Association? Could it be that something happened just now? Did those people abandon me and leave? That wasn't right. Even if they had abandoned me, Nangon would definitely have stayed behind to help me. Why had he disappeared? I thought about it again. Nangon's cultivation had been sealed, so he wouldn't have the spare power to take care of me. However, I had already recovered my cultivation of 1 star. Even if something had happened, I shouldn't have been unable to sense it, right? As I thought about my cultivation, I immediately tried to circulate the shaman energy in my body. In the end, the situation that I was most worried about happened. There wasn't any fluctuation of shaman energy. My body was completely empty. The cultivation that I had recovered had suddenly disappeared. This time, I panicked even more. Could it be that my veins of the true dragon had been sealed again? I subconsciously lowered my head to look at my chest. The moment I looked, I was dumbfounded. My chest, or rather, my entire body from my neck down, had become really weird. From my chest to my abdomen, there was a clear line. The left side of the line looked like my original body, but I didn't know why it was covered in white clothing. I clearly remembered that after I had taken off my clothes for that woman to wear, I was only left with a black shirt. Just the change in clothing wasn't much, but what was even weirder was the right side of my body. The entire right side of my body wasn't covered at all, but it looked completely black. I reached out to touch it in disbelief. Only then did I confirm that the right side of my body, from shoulder to foot, was actually covered in a thick layer of black hair. Not only that, the right side of my body was much bigger than the left. The muscles on it were thick, and even my legs were much longer. I was dumbfounded. I subconsciously reached out to touch my face. As expected, my face was the same as my body. The left side was normal, while the right side was thick and covered in hair. What was going on? What was going on? How did I become like this? I was frightened and angry at the same time. I abruptly stood up from the chair and opened my mouth. A roar that didn't sound like a human's roar rushed out, causing the surroundings to buzz and rumble. At that moment, I realized that the maids and servants on both sides of the path weren't statues, but living people. They turned to look at me, then threw down the tray in their hands in fright. They screamed and ran in all directions. At that moment, I also realized that my body was incomparably huge. No wonder I felt that the maids and servants were very small. It turned out that I was very big. When the maids and servants ran in all directions, dozens of people suddenly rushed in from the end of the jade path. They wore white robes and didn't look young. Moreover, each of them carried a child around 7 or 8 years old. They followed the jade path and used their fastest speed to rush in front of me. Then, they threw the child in their hands at my feet. Afterwards, they neatly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to me while muttering something. At the same time, their eyes were tightly shut, as though they didn't dare to look at me. I didn't know why, but my gaze was attracted by the crying children. Looking at those little dolls that looked like they were carved from jade, an unbearable hunger surged in my stomach. My hand seemed to be involuntarily grabbing a little boy and raising his hand to send him into my mouth. Chapter 373. When I regained consciousness, I opened my eyes. The white light in front of me had disappeared, and President Gu's old face appeared in front of me. I was in a daze as I instantly recalled what had happened. The fear in my heart rose again as I felt that President Gu's old face was incomparably intimate. I really wanted to hug and kiss him. Of course, I didn't do that. I hastily lowered my head to look at my body. There wasn't a beast body that was covered in black fur and muscles, but a normal body that was covered in a black shirt. I heaved a sigh of relief and temporarily threw the fear in my heart to the side. I asked President Gu, "What happened to me?" President Gu's expression was filled with doubt as he shook his head. "You fainted just now, and just as I was about to check on you, you suddenly woke up? What happened? Is there some evil spirit causing trouble in the spring sacrifice hall?" I hastily shook my head and pretended to be at a loss. I don't know either. When I stepped into the cave, I felt my head become heavy and I lost consciousness. I don't know anything now. President Gu's face was filled with doubt as he examined me for a while before asking, "How do you feel now?" I hastily sat up and nodded. "I should be fine now." President Gu snorted coldly and didn't say anything else. He shifted his gaze away from me and briefly explained the situation to the surrounding people before continuing to walk forward. I turned to look at my surroundings and realized that I had fainted not far from the entrance of the cave. Besides the 6 celestial masters from the Metaphysics Association, the others were still on the stairs. It seemed that I hadn't fainted for long. I crawled up from the ground and did some simple exercises. After I felt that my body was fine, I bent down to carry Jean Canwin and continued to walk forward with the Metaphysics Association. Jean Canwin was obviously very concerned about my situation. He frowned and asked me softly, "What happened just now?" I couldn't tell both President Gu and Jean Canwin about the dreamlike scene. I kept silent for a while before smiling wryly. "I really don't know. I don't even know when I fainted. I reckon that there's something strange about this place." Jean Canwin seemed to have thought of something and nodded. "There are so many celestial masters on this trip. It's impossible for evil spirits to avoid so many celestial masters to harm you. I reckon that it's the problem with the spring sacrifice hall. From a sacrificial evil spirit, the merchant's cultivation isn't bad. This is also the spring sacrifice hall where the merchants offer sacrifices to their ancestors. It's normal for there to be some mechanisms. I reckon that you just triggered some mechanism." "Mechanism?" I reflexively asked. I was thinking about what he said earlier. This spring sacrifice hall is the place where the merchants offer sacrifices to their ancestors. In the previous mural, the man who looked exactly like me was obviously the merchant ancestor. If I had any relationship with him, then this spring sacrifice hall would definitely be related to me. In that dream, I must have taken the form of the merchant ancestor. If that was the case, it would make sense. However, there was one thing that I couldn't understand. The appearance of the merchant ancestor in the mural was very normal. However, my appearance in the dream was too frightening. I didn't look like a human, but more like a half-human, half-beast creature. Moreover, that thing ate humans. Could it be that the merchant ancestor was a half-human, half-beast cannibal? Was the mural created by the later generations to beautify his image? If that was the case, and I was his reincarnation, there would be a tragedy. My mind was in a mess. I didn't listen to Jean Camwin's explanation about the mechanism, so I just nodded my head to deal with it. Inside the sacrificial hall, the space behind the first few doors was big enough. However, compared to this grand hall, it was nothing. After walking for a while, we arrived at the center of the grand hall. President Gu was the first one to stop, and the others also stopped. Because I was preoccupied with other matters, I didn't pay attention to my surroundings. After stopping, I lifted my head to look around. I was stunned. At this moment, there was a wide path paved with white jade at the feet of President Gu and the others. On both sides of the path, there were 2 bronze furnaces every 10 meters. Further away, there were many thick stone pillars that connected the ground and the walls. There were all sorts of creatures carved on them. Apart from the fact that there weren't any servants standing respectfully beside the bronze furnaces, everything else was exactly the same as what I had seen in my dream. I was stunned for a few seconds before I recalled where I was in my dream. I quickly followed the white jade path in front of me. However, the light in the spring sacrifice hall wasn't as abundant as it was in my dream. It wasn't like the other floors of the spring sacrifice hall that emitted fluorescent light. There were only some pearl-like objects embedded on the wall that emitted a faint light. It made people feel as though they were under the night sky. To ordinary people, this faint light was no different from being in the middle of a pitch-black night. Only cultivators like me could barely see things under this faint light. However, I could only see things that were close by. I couldn't see things that were too far away. When I was in my dream, the white jade path in front of me didn't feel that it was very big or long. However, it was extremely wide and terrifyingly long. I could only see the end of it. There seemed to be something there, but I couldn't see it clearly even after trying for half a day. I could only give up for now. Fortunately, President Gu only stopped here for a short while before stepping onto the white jade path and sprinting forward. He was walking in the direction of where I was in my memory. Hence, I hastened my steps to catch up with him. After walking for 7 to 8 minutes, I finally saw a huge statue in front of me. The statue was about 40 to 50 meters tall. One side of it was covered in white clothes. Even under the faint light, it was still very clear. The other side was hidden in the darkness, and I could only see the rough outline. Even though it was just a silhouette, I could recognize at a glance that this statue was the image of myself in the dream. I could already see the outline of the statue. The other heavenly masters, who had higher cultivation than me, could naturally see the statue clearly. President Gu stopped again. This time, he didn't rest for a while before continuing his journey. Instead, he called the others over and pointed at the statue not far away. Everyone started to discuss it. It was obvious that they were surprised by the strange statue. I found it strange. The Metaphysical Society, the Witch Race, and the Buddhist Association all had the so-called key. It was obvious that they had been here before. Why were they so surprised by the statue? Could it be that they had only gone to the 3rd door to get the key and had never entered the 4th door? I turned to ask Nan Gong for confirmation. He nodded and said, "According to the legends, there are many forbidden curses in the royal tomb. Moreover, the power needed to open the 4th door is too great. Hence, we didn't continue forward when we came here to get the key. If it wasn't for the Metaphysical Society and Yi Yaolon doing us a favor, we wouldn't have been able to gather enough people to open the 4th door." I lifted my eyes to look at the statue. After I had gotten used to the faint light, the humanoid side of the statue became clearer. The more I looked at it, the more I felt that the humanoid side was built according to my body. It was almost exactly the same as me. However, the others, including Zhang Canwen and Nan Gong, didn't notice that. They only looked at the statue in silence. Not long after, It was clear that President Gu and the others had put the matter of the strange statue aside and informed everyone that the time for the spring sacrifice ceremony was about to arrive. Once the time arrived, the Yin god and evil spirit would definitely appear, and they would gather everyone's strength to strike it down with a single blow. After a brief arrangement, everyone walked under the huge statue. To be on the safe side, everyone didn't split into small groups this time. Instead, the 18 heavenly masters gathered together. Zhang Qinwen, Nangong, and the little zombie stayed in the safe area between the others and the statue. We quietly waited for the evil, sacrificial spirit to arrive. While we were waiting, Zhang Qinwen told me that according to the records of his sect, there was a bronze bell above the statue of the Shang ancestor. When the spring sacrifice ceremony officially began, the bronze bell would ring automatically. As soon as he said that, before I could reply, I heard a clear sound. It sounded like the sound of a bronze bell being struck. However, this sound didn't come from the statue's head, as Zhang Qinwen had said. Instead, it seemed to come from inside my body. It was vast and grand, making my entire body shake. My mind instantly became strangely clear, as if I had drunk some sweet dew from a clear spring. It was as if I had been enlightened. Then, I heard President Gu's voice. The spring sacrifice ceremony has officially begun. Everyone get ready. As I listened to his voice, I felt my heart skip a beat. I took a deep breath and held my breath as I waited in silence. President Gu had said that the evil spirit would appear at the beginning of the spring sacrifice ceremony. It was obvious that he had done his research beforehand. However, it was strange that after waiting for a few minutes, it seemed that nothing had happened. There was no movement around, and nothing had appeared. I was puzzled. Did President Gu make a mistake? With that thought in mind, I turned to ask Zhang Qinwen what was going on. As soon as I turned around, my eyes opened wide. I didn't know when, but there was another figure next to Nangong, Zhang Qinwen, and the little zombie. He sat next to me, his entire body wrapped in a black cloak. He had a triangular head that looked like a skull. His entire brainstem and skull were gone. At the very top of his head were his eye sockets. Two large, round eyeballs were floating there, looking at me with a burning gaze. Chapter 374. In that instant, I was so scared that I forgot to breathe. I was bewildered as I looked at that terrifying face. My mind was blank. Why would he suddenly appear here without a sound? He had a Yin god cultivation base, so it wasn't hard for him to hide from me. However, there were 18 heavenly masters not far from me. How could he hide from them? Under the gaze of the evil, sacrificial spirit, I didn't dare to turn my head. I could only use the corner of my eye to look around. The heavenly masters still had their backs to me. They didn't even notice the situation behind them. Even Nangong and Zhang Qinwen, who were sitting next to me, were focused on the center of the hall. They didn't see the evil, sacrificial spirit either. Only the little zombie that had been following me opened its big eyes and curiously looked at the evil, sacrificial spirit. It didn't look scared at all. I slightly opened my mouth, but I didn't dare to make a sound. With the evil, sacrificial spirit's power and the fact that it was so close to me, if it attacked me, the heavenly masters wouldn't be able to save me even if they were standing right in front of me, let alone the fact that they were a dozen meters away from me. In this critical moment, I tried my best to signal the little zombie with my eyes. I hoped that he would send a signal to the others. The little guy's spirit sense was really sharp. Soon he noticed my eyes. However, he had a pure and kind mind. He couldn't imagine how evil the evil, sacrificial spirit was. He didn't understand the meaning of my eyes. He looked at me with surprise for a while. Then, he turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit with interest. His adorable face even showed a smile. During the whole process, the evil, sacrificial spirit's eyes were glued to my face. He didn't move an inch. My mind gradually became active. I thought that he had been watching me. He must have noticed that I had signaled to the little zombie with my eyes. However, he hadn't taken any action. It seemed that he wasn't that hot-tempered. With that in mind, I gathered my courage and quietly let go of my right hand that was hanging in the air. The The flashlight that I had been holding fell to the ground with a thud. As soon as I heard that sound, my heart was in my throat. I didn't have time to worry about being scared. My eyes gazed at the evil, sacrificial spirit. Fortunately, I had made the right bet. He continued to look at me with a burning gaze, as though he didn't care about anything else. At this moment, the entire hall was shrouded in a tense atmosphere, and it was extremely silent. The sound of the flashlight hitting the ground seemed to have been magnified several times. The moment it spread out, almost everyone's eyes turned to me. In the next second, they all turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. Over here, Taoist Zhang from Longhu Mountain was the first to speak. As his voice fell, the 3-foot-long Tao, sword in his hand, suddenly soared into the air and flew straight toward the evil, sacrificial spirit. When I saw this, I was furious. This ox nose doesn't care about me at all. I'm currently so close to the sacrificial evil spirit. They're at the heavenly master level, but if a bit of their powers were to leak out and affect me, would I still be alive? In that instant, I was so scared that I wanted to piss my pants and hide. However, the might of the celestial master realm wasn't something that I could casually estimate. Just as that thought emerged in my mind, Zhang Daozhang's sword had already appeared next to the evil, sacrificial spirit out of nowhere. A gust of wind swept around his body, and there were even lightning bolts circling around the blade of the sword. Its might was terrifying to the extreme. The Tao sword's target was the evil, sacrificial spirit. However, the aura it emitted made me unable to move. It was as though the air had suddenly become several thousand times denser, turning into a semi-solid substance that was thick and viscous. Although I tried my best, I couldn't even move my pinky finger. In that instant, I had a feeling that I would die under this Tao sword in the next second. Soon, the next second came. Of course, I didn't die. What was even stranger was that the strong pressure around me disappeared in just a blink of an eye. When I felt the Tao sword's aura disappear, I saw the evil, sacrificial spirit next to me slowly raise its hand. It casually pinched the Tao sword and put on the ground. It felt like a person who was watching TV casually pinched a mosquito that was flying in front of him. Taoist Zhang's thunderous attack was blocked just like that. During the whole process, the evil sacrificial spirit's eyes didn't move. It just quietly gazed at me. Impossible. Not far from us, Taoist Zhang, who had been wearing a cold and aloof face, opened his eyes wide. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. He muttered, "It's just the Yin's spirit. How could it block my heavenly thundersword?" Everyone was silent. After a few seconds, President Gu answered solemnly, "This Yin spirit is an evil spirit from ancient times. It has cultivated for thousands of years and has returned to the world from Gehenna. It's inevitable that it has some good fortune. However, Taoist Zhang, you don't need to worry. Let's join hands and suppress it." After listening to him, Taoist Zhang's face didn't relax. Instead, it became more solemn. After a moment of silence, he asked President Gu with a dull face, "Didn't you say that it's the evil spirit that guards the offering hall of Yinshang? What do you mean by returning to the world from Gehenna?" President Gu nodded. He quickly explained how, when Tianxiang led the evil, sacrificial spirit to transform into the true dragon vein 1,000 years ago and tried to change the destiny of the dragon vein. After that, he said, "The details are based on our speculation. It's hard to say whether it's true or not. That's why we didn't tell you before." After listening to him, Taoist Zhang's face became more solemn. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "According to the records of the fourth-generation ancestor of Longhu Mountain, any living creature that crosses the boundary will be restricted by the laws of heaven and earth. Its cultivation will be stripped by 2 levels. If this evil spirit has the cultivation of Yin spirit, then when it was in Gehenna, it had the cultivation of Shaju?" "What?" President Gu's eyes widened. He suddenly turned to look at Taoist Zhang and asked hurriedly, "Brother Zhang, is this true?" Taoist Zhang's eyes were still fixed on the evil, sacrificial spirit. He nodded and said, "How can the records of the 4th-generation celestial master Zhang of Longhu Mountain be false? Everyone was silent for a while. The originally silent atmosphere became even more tranquil at this moment. But very quickly, President Gu said, "Even so, this evil spirit is only at the Yin spirit stage. At most, it can use some methods, such as charging and shaju. So what? We, the young god celestial master, are already above him. Now that we have the help of so many fellow Taoists, if we attack together, how can he gain any advantage? Just now, he mentioned something about shaju cultivation, and now he mentioned shaju and shaju. I've seen it in the Taoist scripture. It said that when people cultivate to the end, they can ascend to the heavens and become immortals of the heaven realm. Could it be that this shaju is also a kind of cultivation realm? If that's the case, this so-called shaju is no different from a real immortal, right? While I was thinking about this, the Celestial Masters recovered a lot after listening to President Gu's advice. This time, Taoist Zhang took the lead and said to the others, "Everyone, the nature of the Yin spirit, evil spirit, is restrained by us Yang God, Celestial Masters. This evil spirit's cultivation is not ordinary, and it's very likely that it has a heaven-defying power. We can't continue fighting with it. Take out your Yang spirit and punish it with one strike. This is the best plan. Fellow Taoists, those who have cultivated the Yang spirit, and I will take out our Yang spirits. Those who have not cultivated the Yang spirit, and take out their celestial master seals will have the same effect." After he finished speaking, the other celestial masters didn't have any objections. They cooperated and quickly took out their Yang spirits or celestial master seals, quietly waiting for Taoist Zhang to give the order to attack. At the same time, the sacrificial evil spirit, who was sitting next to me, didn't seem to be thinking straight. During the whole process, the celestial masters looked at us cautiously, obviously to prevent a surprise attack. However, the sacrificial evil spirit didn't react at all, let alone a surprise attack. He just stared at me blankly, letting those people take out their Yang spirits or celestial master seals. Finally, the 18 celestial masters were ready. With Zhang Daozhang's order, countless Yang spirits and celestial master seals, with a unique brilliance, rushed toward the evil sacrificial spirit with overwhelming power. Chapter 375. Earlier, Zhang Daozhang had attacked alone. This time, there were 18 celestial masters. Their combined power wasn't something that Zhang Daozhang's Taoist sword could compare to. Last time, the sword's aura had made me feel as if I was in a semi-solid state. This time, I felt as if I had been buried in thousands of kilograms of concrete. The boundless pressure made all the joints in my body creak, as if they could break at any time. There was no breath in my nose. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't take in a single breath of air. This time, the evil sacrificial spirit finally moved his eyes away from my face, but he didn't look like he was going to die. He could only watch the situation unfold helplessly. Moreover, he knew clearly that he could be killed by the shock waves of their battle. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this feeling was the feeling of death. This time, the evil sacrificial spirit's eyes finally moved away from my face. His movements were very slow. Compared to the Yang spirits and the celestial master seals, he looked like an old man. He slowly stood up from the ground and slowly turned around to face the Yang spirits that filled the sky. Then he slowly lifted his hand and pushed the cloak that was wrapped around his head down, revealing his terrifying head. After he had done all that, the Yang spirits and the celestial master seals, which were extremely fast in my eyes, finally arrived in front of him. At this moment, the pressure around my body had reached its peak. Not only was I unable to breathe, but even the air in my lungs and trachea was squeezed out. Even the oxygen in my blood seemed to have left me. At the same time, there were several crisp sounds coming from my chest. It was the sound of my sternum breaking. She. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit's shriveled mouth, which looked like tree bark, suddenly opened and chanted two mysterious syllables that were difficult to distinguish. As he chanted, He raised his arm and placed it in front of him. From left to right, he simply drew a horizontal line. The moment he finished all these movements, the pressure and restraint on my body suddenly disappeared. Not only that, the yang spirits and the celestial master seals that were rushing forward suddenly stopped a few meters away from the evil sacrificial spirit. The celestial master seals with weak light were fine. After hovering in the air, they didn't move. On the other hand, the yang spirits of Zhang Daozhong, President Gu, and President Run of the Taoist Association were dazzling. After a slight pause, they violently flew backward. Like children, they shrieked in unison. The most miserable one was Zhang Daozhong's yang spirit. The most miserable one was Zhang Daozhong's yang spirit, who was rushing at the front. His yang spirit was the most mystical. He held a sword in his hand, which seemed to have an illusory brilliance and was very magical. But at this moment, as the yang spirit flew backward, the sword in his hand also broke into two pieces. The upper part disappeared after it was broken, and the lower half of the sword had some white crystal juice flowing out. Although the color was different from blood, at first glance, it seemed that the yang spirit had been injured and was bleeding. It was obvious that he had been seriously injured. It was true. Among the 18 celestial masters, the celestial masters whose cultivation base was less than half of the yang spirit realm only swayed a little. The other half of the yang spirit celestial masters retreated a few steps, and blood trickled down the corners of their mouths. The one who suffered the most was Zhang Daozhong. His entire body collapsed on the ground. His face was purplish gold, and blood was flowing out of his 7 orifices. He was half crawling on the ground like a ghost, spitting blood and twitching. It was an extremely miserable sight. I dropped my jaw as I looked at the scene in front of me. I was dumbfounded. How could it be? There were 18 celestial masters, and half of them were yang spirit celestial masters. Even with such a powerful lineup, they couldn't even defeat a Yin deity or evil spirit. I was surprised, but the 18 wounded heavenly masters were frightened. The first to break down were the heavenly masters who hadn't had a yang god yet. Almost at the same time, they retrieved their heavenly master seals back into their bodies. They looked at the evil sacrificial spirit with vigilance and fear on their faces. It seemed they would turn around and run away at any moment. Then the other yang spirit celestial masters followed suit. They immediately called back their wounded yang spirits and looked at the evil spirit with vigilance and fear. They slowly retreated. Only President Gu and the 3 celestial masters from Longhu Mountain didn't retreat. President Gu was so shocked that he forgot to run away. The other 2 celestial masters from Longhu Mountain supported Zhang Daozhong to check his condition. Zhang Daozhong seemed to be severely injured. He couldn't even absorb the broken yang spirit into his body. He anxiously hovered above his head, and the light on his yang spirit had dimmed. I had to say that the people of Longhu Mountain had a stronger bond than the Metaphysics Association. The other 2 celestial masters didn't run away. They took the risk and took out a jade box from Zhang Daozhong's body. They took out a red pill the size of a fist and put it into Zhang Daozhong's mouth. They also injected Taoist energy into his body to help him recover. Zhang Daozhong's gray eyes glowed again. He didn't twitch anymore. He gritted his teeth, sat cross-legged on the ground, and slowly absorbed the broken yang spirit into his body. All of this took a long time. During the whole process, the evil spirit didn't attack again. It just looked at everything indifferently. Perhaps it was because the evil spirit didn't intend to take the initiative to hurt them. The other celestial masters who were ready to escape didn't leave. They just hid far away and watched the situation unfold in panic. Finally, Zhang Daozhong's yang spirit was completely absorbed into his body. When he opened his eyes, he had obviously recovered a lot. While staring at the evil spirit, he asked President Gu in a trembling voice, "What the hell is going on?" President Gu had already come to his senses at this time, but his expression was still dull, and he had long lost his usual hypocritical smile. He replied in an extremely low voice, his cultivation, "Maybe I'm wrong. Even if this evil spirit doesn't have an spirit rush, I'm afraid it's not far away. Cultivation. Impossible. It's the law of heaven and earth. If he had a cultivation of ascension, wouldn't he be an earth immortal when he was in the underworld? It's impossible. Zhang Daozhang's expression became incomparably gloomy as he rambled on. It was hard to tell if he was venting his anger or trying to comfort himself. After a while, he finally managed to squeeze out another sentence. So what do we do now? President Gu's mind slowly returned to normal. He immediately answered, "This evil spirit doesn't seem to have any malicious intentions towards us. The two attacks it made were counterattacks, and it doesn't show any signs of taking the initiative to attack us. We'd better retreat. After we go back and report the details to the old president and celestial master Zhang, we'll decide what to do next." Zhang Daozhang didn't think for long. Soon, he nodded and said, "All right then, let's go." Then, he and President Gu took action at the same time. Unlike the other celestial masters who had stared at the evil spirit and retreated little by little, they directly turned around and ran back the way they had come at full speed. Seeing their actions, the other celestial masters who were still watching from the sidelines immediately sprang into action as well. The 18 of them ran away in a chaotic manner like a swarm of bees. I was dumbfounded again. What should I do if they run away? Nangong, Zhang Kanwan, and the little zombie were still behind the evil spirit. If we wanted to run away, we would have to go around him. What's more, our cultivations are either sealed or we're seriously injured, so we can't use our Taoist chi at all. The only ones who still have some strength are the little zombie and me, but our cultivations are far inferior to those heaven masters. Even if the evil sacrificial spirit doesn't stop us, I'm afraid those heaven masters will have already blocked the way in by the time we reach the entrance. What should I do? While my heart was burning with anxiety, I suddenly heard the loud and clear sound of a bell. This bell sound was much louder than the last time. Hearing this sound, my entire head buzzed. After a while, I recovered my consciousness. I lifted my head to look at the empty sacrificial hall in front of me. Suddenly, there was a lot of white smoke rising in the air. The white smoke wasn't thick, so it didn't affect my vision. On the contrary, the light in the surroundings seemed to be brighter. At first glance, I saw a group of celestial masters running in the distance. It was strange that they were standing next to a high wall, looking for something like headless flies. Chapter 376. The hole that we came from had disappeared. In other words, we had no way out and were trapped in the spring sacrifice hall. Just now, I was thinking that if the sacrificial evil spirit didn't care about me, I might be able to escape with Zhang Kanwen and Nangong. Now, I was afraid that even my last hope was gone. The heaven masters in the distance had already used their techniques to attack the stone wall in front of them. The might of the heaven masters' techniques was not to be underestimated. Not to mention a normal stone wall, even a concrete wall could be easily broken as long as the thickness wasn't too exaggerated. However, the stone wall here was very strange. No matter how hard the heaven masters attacked, there wasn't even a crack on the stone wall, let alone a hole. It was as hard as iron. "Everyone, please stop and listen to me." President Gu's voice was heard again. He was slightly panting, but he tried his best to speak in a calm voice. "Just now, we worked together to open the fourth door, which was under the spring sacrifice hall. We don't know what the situation is with this stone wall. Why don't we use the method we used to break the door and work together to create a hole in the ground? What do you think?" Just as he finished speaking, one of the heavenly masters from Mount Longhu immediately objected. "Just now, we almost used up all the Tao Qi in our bodies to break the door. Even if we get out, what should we do if the God evil spirit chases after us? Moreover, breaking the door will take a lot of time. Why would the evil spirit give us?" "Shut up." Before he could speak, Zhang Daozhang, who was at the side, shouted coldly and interrupted him. He then said to President Gu, "There's no time to lose. Let's do it quickly." He was a person who could keep his composure. President Gu's suggestion was actually the most suitable method. In such a dangerous situation, The safest method was the fastest way to escape. If they had to find a shortcut to escape, it would be a waste of time. After a short discussion, the others didn't say anything else. They swiftly gathered together and prepared to break the door. However, at that moment, another bell rang in the hall. This was the third bell, and it was even louder than the previous two. It shook my chest, and my blood surged. My already injured body couldn't take it anymore, and I immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Jean Canwin, who was at the side, wasn't much stronger than me. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood as well, looking extremely fatigued. With the previous two experiences, everyone knew that as long as the bell rang, the evil sacrificial spirit would definitely react. Thus, the heavenly masters in the distance stopped their actions of forcefully breaking the door. They turned around and stared at the sacrificial evil spirit in front of me. I also quickly retracted my gaze from the distance and stared at the evil spirit in front of me. The evil sacrificial spirit slowly turned around and faced me. My heart skipped a beat. Does he want to deal with me? Suppressing the fear in my heart, I slowly lifted my head. Although the evil sacrificial spirit was facing me, its two big eyes weren't looking at me. Instead, they were looking upward. I turned around and understood that the evil spirit was looking at the half-human, half-beast statue behind me. When I turned around, the evil sacrificial spirit moved again. His two bony arms slowly rose from both sides of his body. When they were parallel to his shoulders, his hands moved quickly, making all kinds of hand seals. In the end, his hands flattened and moved in front of his chest. His left palm covered the back of his right hand, and both hands pressed on his chest at the same time. Then he bent his knees and knelt in front of me. I gawked. The heavenly masters who were watching from a distance also opened their eyes wide. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Before I could react, the evil sacrificial spirit slowly kowtowed. When his head touched the ground, he didn't retract it. Instead, he stretched his body and prostrated himself on the ground. At this moment, I got it. I turned around and saw that he wasn't kowtowing to me. He was kowtowing to the big statue behind me. As soon as I understood what was going on, I moved my body to the side. However, there was a strange force that pinned my feet to the ground. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move a single step. At this moment, the well-ghost kowtowing ritual seemed to have ended. He got up from the ground. Right when I thought he was going to do something else, he lifted his arms a second time and repeated the kowtowing process. President Gu immediately understood what was going on. It was obvious that the evil spirit was going to perform some special consciousness, and it must have kowtowed more than once. Therefore, he quickly woke up the others around him and stopped staring at the evil spirit. Instead, he took advantage of this opportunity to mobilize his chi of the way and began to forcefully break out of the ground. There were a total of 18 heavenly masters. After they mobilized their Taoist chi, they created a huge commotion. However, this time, I was far away, so it didn't affect me. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to care about their attempt to escape. It continued to earnestly and respectfully perform the entire set of kowtows. At this moment, I couldn't move my body. I stood there in a daze and watched the evil sacrificial spirit kowtow to me. I felt extremely strange. Just like that, time passed second by second. The evil sacrificial spirit kowtowed 9 times in a row. When it crawled up from the ground for the 9th time, it finally stopped its movements and didn't kneel again. Meanwhile, on President Gu's side, under their joint efforts, a faint crack had already appeared on the ground beside the mountain wall. No one had time to care about the situation on the side of the evil sacrificial spirit. They were all doing their best to continue sending their Tao Qi into the crack. Obviously, under the pressure of this dangerous situation, they used all their strength. Making a hole in the ground was actually faster than making the hole in the door that was already there. The crack on the ground was getting bigger and bigger. Rocks and stones scattered around the crack. Right at this moment, my vision blurred. The evil sacrificial spirit had disappeared. Then, I didn't even have a second to spare. I heard someone scream from a distance. I looked again and saw that the evil sacrificial spirit was standing in front of me. However, he was holding a person in his hand. To be exact, it was a monk from the Taoist Association. The monk was around 40 years old. At this moment, his eyes were wide open. The clothes around his waist were in the well ghost's hand. His limbs were limp and hanging backward. It was obvious that he was dead. Previously, when I saw the well ghost resist the attacks of 18 celestial masters, I knew that he wasn't ordinary. However, fighting and killing were different. The evil sacrificial spirit had killed a celestial master in just a blink of an eye. His power was much stronger than I had imagined. That shrill scream sounded extremely loud in the silent sacrificial hall. President Gu and his men must have heard it, but they did not stop what they were doing. They were still pouring Taoist qi into the fissure. Although they had lost one person, the project was nearing its end. They knew what to do. Soon, the evil sacrificial spirit threw the person in front of me and disappeared again. It was almost the same rhythm as before. After another scream, the evil sacrificial spirit returned to my side. It was holding another priest's corpse. This time, I recognized the person who had died. He was a member of the Metaphysics Association and Han Wenan's second uncle. Originally, I hated Han Wenan and his second uncle. However, after entering the sacrificial hall, Han Wenan had jumped into the blood sacrifice well in just a few hours. Then his second uncle had died in front of me. All of a sudden, the hatred in my heart faded a little. President Gu and the others were panicking. There was a slight commotion among the celestial masters. They were lucky that they had only killed one person. But now, the evil sacrificial spirit was going to slaughter them. From the way it had placed their corpses on the statue, it was possible that the evil sacrificial spirit was going to sacrifice them. Everyone, don't panic. The passageway is about to open. Don't panic. President Gu shouted again. This time, his choice was still very correct. Although the sacrificial evil spirit had already started to kill, they were about to succeed. If they fought against the evil spirit for time, they still had a chance of winning. However, if they lost their footing and stopped what they were doing, all their previous efforts would be in vain. Unfortunately, not everyone was as calm as he was. When the evil sacrificial spirit attacked for the third time, two of the celestial masters felt that they were the evil sacrificial spirit's target. They stopped pouring their Tao energy and took out their instruments. Then, they turned around and roared as they charged at the evil sacrificial spirit. It turned out that the two of them were mistaken. After they used their instruments, the evil sacrificial spirit returned to me with another dead celestial master and threw him on the ground. With the two of them taking the lead, the order was broken. No matter how much President Gu and Zhang Daozhang shouted, the other celestial masters stopped pouring their Tao energy at the same time. Seeing that the situation had taken a turn for the worse, President Gu and Zhang Daozhang looked at each other. They felt hopeless and cast a spell at the 3-meter-long crack on the ground. However, it would take time for the 18 celestial masters to work together. How could they do it with just the two of them? The evil sacrificial spirit disappeared for the fourth time. Soon, the celestial masters lost their fourth member. All their previous efforts were in vain. The celestial masters were like fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered by the evil sacrificial spirit. Seeing this, President Gu, Zhang Daozhang, and the other leaders finally gave up on the idea of running away. Their eyes glowed with murderous intent. President Gu was the first to speak. He shouted at Zhang Daozhang, "Brother Zhang, use the celestial master sword." Chapter 377. After all, they were all heavenly master cultivators. Following President Gu's words, the group of people quickly recovered from their panic and gathered in President Gu's direction. Occasionally, there were one or two who were still in a frenzy, but their fellow disciples quickly woke them up. As for the evil sacrificial spirit, it was the same as before. It didn't care about the heavenly master's actions. It didn't take the chance to attack. Instead, it calmly placed the fourth heavenly master's corpse in front of me, or rather, in front of the statue. Then it turned around and attacked for the fifth time. This time, the Celestial Masters were not so easy to deal with. Although the short amount of time was not enough for them to use the Jade Blood Talisman, Nirvana, and other techniques like what Chief Gu had said, in the face of the oncoming evil spirit, the Celestial Masters, who had reorganized themselves, attacked at the same time. Each of them used their own techniques. In an instant, the vast open space in front of them was filled with overwhelming chi of Tao. The brilliance of the techniques flashed and swallowed, completely burying the body of the sacrificial evil spirit. It was scary when a heavenly master fought with his life on the line. Moreover, there were 14 of them at the same time. The strong wind from the Taoist techniques made me feel uneasy even though I was far away, let alone the evil sacrificial spirit. It was different from the previous times. This time, the evil spirit's sacrifice took nearly 10 times longer than before. Only then did it flash out from the countless rays of light. However, the same thing was that it still had a corpse in its hand. I couldn't help but drop my jaw. According to the previous battles, I knew that even if the remaining 14 heavenly masters fought with their lives on the line, they wouldn't be able to defeat the evil sacrificial spirit. However, I thought that it wouldn't be a problem to stop it for now. I didn't expect that even though everyone was fighting with their lives on the line, they still couldn't stop the evil sacrificial spirit from killing. Unlike my surprise, President Gu's expression didn't change at all. The moment the evil sacrificial spirit escaped from their hands, he shouted for everyone to stop and repeated what he had said earlier. If there had been a sliver of luck earlier, everyone now knew what kind of power they were facing. No one objected. All the Taoist priests, including those from the Metaphysics Association, activated the Jade Blood Talisman at the same time and slapped their palms on their chests. In an instant, a bloody light burst out, and mysterious talismans formed by chi and blood appeared in the air. Then, they returned to their bodies and disappeared. Then, everyone's aura became different. Just by standing there, without activating their chi of the way, I felt an inexplicable palpitation in my heart. The remaining 5 monks from the Buddhist Association also made a move. However, their so-called nirvana technique was not as bloody as the Taoists. The 5 monks merely put their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. Then the aura on their bodies rose. No one knew how they activated the secret technique. After doing all this, the evil sacrificial spirit put down the 5th corpse, turned around, and walked towards them again. This time, the heavenly masters were even calmer. They did not casually use the Tao techniques in their hands. Instead, they silently waited for the evil, sacrificial spirit to reach them. Only then did they raise their hands at the same time, as if they were enlightened. It was different from the last time. This time, they did not use Tao techniques. Instead, they all activated the magic tools in their hands. The Taoist and Zhuanist sects mostly used swords, while the Buddhist sects used prayer beads. After all, when they had tried to break the exit on the ground, they had used up a lot of their chi. To save their chi, it was better to use magic tools than Tao techniques. The evil sacrificial spirit's body disappeared among the magic tools that filled the sky. Even though I was standing far away, I couldn't help but shrink back. The Heavenly Master's magic tools were really terrifying, especially the Yang God Celestial Masters like President Gu and Zhang Daozhang. While their swords were moving, some of the sword energy even reached the area in front of me. At this moment, they were using the Jade Blood Talisman secret technique. Even if it was just a little bit of sword energy, it was enough to cut me in half. I had to be careful. While I was trembling in fear, a red sword energy that looked like a waterfall came toward my face. I was startled and wanted to dodge to the side. However, my body swayed and I fell to the ground. Only then did I remember that I couldn't move my legs. Although I couldn't move my legs, I could still move the other parts of my body. However, the sword energy that was coming at me was moving vertically. Even if I dodged to the side, my legs would still be cut by the sword energy. I was afraid that I would become disabled in the future. I was frightened to the extreme. I desperately pulled my legs, wanted to break free from this restraint. However, all my resistance was futile. No matter how I struggled, my legs were firmly welded to the ground. There wasn't even the slightest sign of loosening. At this moment, the sword energy was less than 2 meters away from me. Even if I managed to get my legs free, it would be hard for me to dodge the sword energy's swift speed. I didn't even have time to feel despair before the sword energy arrived in front of me. Then, it suddenly disappeared. At that moment, I felt as if I had just walked through the gates of hell. I was bewildered. After a while, I pulled myself together and turned to look at the big statue behind me. I guessed that the statue had some kind of barrier that had helped me block the sword energy. Otherwise, judging from the state of the sword chi at that time, there was no reason for it to disappear on its own. Very quickly, I confirmed my guess as the second streak of sword energy rushed over. Even though it wasn't directly aimed at me, it still disappeared not far from my side. I exhaled in relief. I lifted my head and continued to watch the battle between the evil, sacrificial spirit and the heavenly masters. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit appeared again. Just like before, he was still holding a corpse in his hand. But this time, his black cloak was a little messy, and one could vaguely see that there was a tear in it. It was obvious that he wasn't easy to deal with the heavenly master's joint attack. However, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to have any emotion. His ugly face still wore an indifferent expression. He placed the sixth corpse in front of me and didn't even look like he wanted to rest. He immediately turned around and dashed forward again. His actions caused everyone to feel despair in their hearts. The heavenly masters had used their secret techniques to stimulate their potential. However, it was all in vain. They could only slow down the evil, sacrificial spirit a little. It didn't stop him from killing more people. He didn't even give the evil, sacrificial spirit a chance to rest. The evil, sacrificial spirit didn't look like he was killing people. It was more like he was harvesting crops. He was like an old farmer holding a sickle and harvesting wheat. He didn't show any signs of stopping. Although they were desperate, this was a matter of life and death. No one had a choice but to risk their lives. This time, the evil sacrificial spirit spent a lot more time. When he returned, his cloak was torn, which made him look a little funny. However, the result didn't change. He was still holding a corpse. Moreover, the corpse this time was different from the previous 6 times. This time, it was President Run of the Taoist Association. Even though President Run had used the Jade Blood Transformation Talisman twice in the previous battle with Mount Longhu and had consumed a lot of his Dao Qi, he was still a young God Heavenly Master. With the support of the Jade Blood Talisman for the 3rd time, his strength was still extremely terrifying. Amongst all the Heavenly Masters present, he could be ranked in the top few. However, he still couldn't defeat the evil sacrificial spirit and was killed. Even his young god didn't have time to escape. Looking at President Ren's frightened and confused eyes, the Heavenly Master's morale fell to the bottom. Everyone knew that if the current situation continued, the evil sacrificial spirit could only kill them one by one. They had no hope of winning at all. Even the desperate secret method was useless. Fortunately, the 3 Taoist priests of Dragon Tiger Mountain still had a final trump card in their hands. This time, without waiting for President Gu to speak, Zhang Daozhang, who was the leader, raised the Celestial Master Sword in his hand and said to the remaining 11 Celestial Masters in a hurry, "Everyone, the Celestial Master Sword in my hand is the treasure of Dragon Tiger Mountain. It is extremely powerful, but it also requires a terrifying amount of Dao Qi. At this time, we have consumed too much of our Dao Qi and cannot support using it at all. Only by concentrating our Dao Qi together can we quickly activate the Celestial Master Sword. Moreover, the power of the Celestial Master Sword is almost limitless. The more Taoist Qi you inject, the more powerful it will be. Please help me kill this evil spirit together." A dying person, even if it was a straw, had to hold on tightly to it. Not to mention that the Celestial Master Sword of Dragon Tiger Mountain was extremely famous. Zhang Daozhang's words were definitely not nonsense. Therefore, everyone didn't even have time to respond. They immediately stood behind Zhang Daozhang as fast as they could and gathered the remaining Taoist Qi in their bodies towards the Celestial Master Sword. They were so fast that when the evil sacrificial spirit rushed towards them for the 8th time, the Celestial Master Sword was already spitting out sword radiance. Unlike the previous chaotic battle, this time, the remaining 11 Celestial Masters used the Celestial Master Sword to completely concentrate their power. What was waiting for the evil sacrificial spirit was no longer a large number of Taoist techniques and Dharma artifacts, but a bright sword radiance that bloomed from the only Celestial Master Sword. For the first time, the evil sacrificial spirit stopped in front of a group of Celestial Masters. He didn't rush forward recklessly. Instead, he raised his hands from his side and chanted 2 strange and mysterious syllables. Chi, Chi. As he spoke, he raised his hands in the air and slowly drew a circle. At this time, the sword radiance on the Celestial Master Sword had finally expanded to a terrifying extent. Following Zhang Daozhang's angry shout, a huge sword radiance that looked like an inverted waterfall left the Celestial Master Sword and shot towards the evil sacrificial spirit like lightning. It collided with the circle that he had just drawn. A thunderous sound that sounded like the 9 heavens resounded. The gigantic sword light dispersed and splashed in all directions. The surface of the flagstone floor that the 18 Celestial Masters couldn't break in a short period of time was instantly shattered. The broken stones flew in all directions. The sacrificial hall was in a complete mess. Only the area near the statue wasn't affected. Chapter 378. As expected of the treasure of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Under the effects of the Celestial Master's sword, the Celestial Masters who were on the verge of collapse were able to turn the situation around. I was elated. Even though both sides were my enemies, I was more inclined towards the Celestial Masters, who were also humans, compared to the evil, sacrificial spirit. While I was elated, the Celestial Masters didn't let down their guard. After the previous attack, all of their Taoist energy had been depleted. Some of them couldn't even support themselves and fell to the ground. Even so, no one dared to take a deep breath. Everyone held their breaths and stared at the sacrificial spirit that was sent flying. The same question popped up in their minds. Did we defeat him? In the current situation, the best outcome would be to kill the sacrificial spirit. Only then would everyone be truly safe. However, no one dared to have such an extravagant hope. Everyone's biggest hope was to severely injure him so that he could escape. As long as they could preserve their lives, nothing else mattered. In fact, the people from Metaphysics Association had long forgotten the reason they had come. However, it was a pity that it was just their wishful thinking. The retreating body of the evil, sacrificial spirit finally stopped. It stopped not far from me. He was indeed severely injured. The black cloak on his body had been completely shredded by the sword energy, leaving only a few ragged pieces of cloth on his body. Without the hood of the cloak, the evil sacrificial spirit, which had become eerie and terrifying, looked even more terrifying. Its body was covered with dried flesh and bones wrapped with inner power. Many parts of its body looked like it had been bitten by insects, with many holes. It looked like a living mummy. What was worse was that the sword energy hadn't only shredded his cloak, but it had also left huge wounds on his body. His mummified body naturally wouldn't bleed, but the wounds were even more obvious. At that moment, the sacrificial spirit was like a rag doll that had been baptized by a violent storm. 1.5 of his arms were missing. His right leg had been chopped off from the middle of his thigh, leaving only a bit of rotten flesh hanging on it. Apart from that, there was an irregular large hole on his abdomen. It was much bigger than the hole that I had left on Lu Jinyang's chest with the silver talisman. It had almost cut him in half. If a human were to suffer such severe injuries, no matter how high their cultivation was, they would not be able to escape death. Even if he didn't die, he shouldn't be able to fight anymore. However, the evil sacrificial spirit was not human. He did not even look at himself. After standing still for a few seconds, he dragged his broken leg and continued walking toward the group of heavenly masters. His completely broken right leg couldn't support him to walk normally, so the evil sacrificial spirit hopped over. His movements were comical, but no one could laugh. Everyone's faces were filled with fear, which then turned into despair. Fortunately, the evil sacrificial spirit's leaping speed was far slower than before, so the heavenly masters were able to shake off their despair and muster their last bit of courage. This time, Taoist Zhang was the one who spoke. He gripped the celestial master's sword tightly in his hand, as if he had absorbed strength from it. He suddenly straightened his body, and the despair on his face instantly disappeared. Then, he gritted his teeth and shouted angrily at the crowd. "I am the sect master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the blood brother of the current celestial master Zhang. I don't want to die here. You are all outstanding figures in the metaphysics world. If you die here for no reason, who would be willing?" After shouting, he took a few heavy breaths and said in a slightly lower voice, "I know that all of you are in the same situation as me. The Taoist qi in your body has been completely exhausted, and you can no longer use the secret method of sacrificing your lifespan. However, the celestial master sword in my hand doesn't need Taoist qi. It can only be activated by pure yang liquid." I don't know what pure yang liquid is, but when Taoist Zhang said it, almost all the heavenly masters looked shocked. Taoist Zhang didn't care about their expressions at all. He gritted his teeth and recited the incantation, summoning his yang spirit again. When a yang spirit appeared above his head, he immediately raised the celestial master sword in his hand. "With my cultivation, there are only 10 drops of pure yang liquid in my yang spirit. This is not the time to cherish my cultivation. I should prioritize survival." After saying that, he made a few mysterious hand gestures. Then, the yang spirit above his head suddenly showed a painful expression on its face. It opened its small mouth and quickly spat out a drop of golden liquid. This should be the pure yang liquid he was talking about. With the appearance of this drop of golden liquid, the yang spirit seemed to have shrunk. The original bright brilliance on it also dimmed a lot, and even its whole body began to tremble. Zhang Daoist Zhang's face was also extremely pale. The corner of his mouth, which was already covered with blood, had another line of blood flowing down. However, he was not moved at all. He made another incantation gesture to activate the yang spirit and spat out a second drop of golden liquid. At this time, the others also came to their senses. The first to respond was still President Gu. He was much more direct than Taoist Zhang. He shouted, "If your cultivation is gone, you can cultivate again. If you die, everything will be over. Everyone, use all your strength to activate the pure yang liquid. Quick!" Those who haven't cultivated the yang spirit can activate the pure yang qi. With his words, it seemed that everyone came to their senses. Everyone's face showed a struggle at first. Then they gritted their teeth and made a decision. Among the remaining 11 celestial masters, there were 8 yang spirit celestial masters and 6 Taoist and Xian schools. Each of them summoned their own yang spirits and began to activate the pure yang liquid. As for the 2 Buddhist monks who had the cultivation of a yang spirit celestial master, a golden Buddha statue appeared above their heads. There was no golden liquid in the Buddha statue, but as they chanted scriptures, golden rings fell off one after another from the bald head of the golden Buddha statue and gathered around Zhang Daoist Zhang. After a round of killing, there were only 3 ordinary celestial masters left. They were 2 from the Metaphysics Association and 1 from the Buddhism Association. They also tried their best. The 2 from the Metaphysics Association summoned the Celestial Master Seal. After making a hand gesture, a pale golden mist rose from the seal, looking like the light shadow of the Celestial Master Seal. When the light shadow flew to Zhang Daoist Zhang's side, the 2 Celestial Master Seals cracked at the same time. The original brilliance disappeared, and countless fine cracks covered the entire seal. As for the monk from the Buddhism Association, he summoned a golden bead. There was no aura rising from the bead, but the bead flew directly towards Zhang Daoist Zhang. In just 10 seconds, dozens of drops of pure yang liquid gathered around Zhang Daoist Zhang. Each yang spirit celestial master contributed 1 to 10 drops. After all the pure yang liquid was contributed, the 8 yang spirit celestial masters looked almost the same. They were thin and shriveled, almost like miniature versions of the evil, sacrificial spirits. They quickly hid back into their bodies. The celestial masters couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed to the ground. This time, they couldn't even sit still. They all lay on the ground, looking extremely miserable. At such a sad and solemn moment, Nangong, who was sitting next to me, suddenly burst into laughter. Ever since he had entered the spring sacrifice hall, he had been sitting cross-legged next to me with his eyes closed. He hadn't said a single word. I didn't know why, but at this moment, he suddenly made a sound. I looked over and saw that Nangong was looking at the celestial masters in the distance. I didn't know how he felt my gaze, but the corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. He seemed to be talking to me, but also seemed to be lamenting to himself. They really put their lives on the line. After the pure yang liquid is used up, these people's cultivation will regress to the realm where they had just cultivated the yang spirit. Moreover, their future cultivation will be 100 times more difficult. What's worse are the 3 ordinary celestial masters. The others can still cultivate again, but after the celestial master seal is broken, their cultivation path will be completely severed. Previously, from the actions of the celestial masters, I could feel that they had paid a huge price. However, I hadn't expected that the price would be to destroy their own cultivation path. Cultivation was the job of every cultivator in the metaphysics world. It also represented a goal and hope. Destroying one's own cultivation path. There was nothing crueler than this. I didn't say anything and turned my head back. At this moment, Zhang Daozhong was still standing there with his back straight. He gripped the celestial master sword tightly and stared at the evil, sacrificial spirit in front of him. Once again, he chanted a spell that was as loud as thunder. The righteous is not evil. The one is not mixed. The heart of righteousness. All techniques return to one. Following his voice, dozens of drops of golden liquid, 2 balls of faint golden light, and a pure golden bead seemed to be attracted by something at the same time as they surged towards the celestial master sword. In an instant, the celestial master sword was like a torch that had been lit, giving off a dazzling golden light. Countless rays of golden light shone from it, forming a huge golden sword shadow in midair. After the sword shadow appeared, Zhang Daozhong, who had been holding on until now, blacked out and fainted on the ground. Although he had fainted, the power of the celestial master sword was displayed. The huge golden sword shadow descended from midair and charged towards the evil, sacrificial spirit. Chapter 379. No matter what, there would always be a limit, just like the protective circle of the statue that I was currently in. Previously, the evil sacrificial spirit and the celestial master had exchanged blows several times, but none of them had affected this place. I had always been safe within it. However, this time, the situation was completely different. After the enormous golden sword shadow swallowed the evil sacrificial spirit, it didn't stop. Instead, it continued to slash downwards and heavily struck the ground. A deafening sound resounded. Subsequently, the entire spring sacrifice hall seemed to have experienced a small-scale earthquake. Regardless of whether it was the walls or the ground, they all trembled, stirring up countless dust and gravel. That wasn't the end of it. After the sword shadow disappeared into the ground, a sword light shot out parallel to the ground and charged towards the statue. The speed of the sword light was extremely fast. Almost at the same time that the sound of the sword shadow colliding with the ground reached my ears, it was already in front of us. At the start, I didn't pay much attention due to the ancient barrier surrounding the statue. However, very quickly, I heard a clear shattering sound. Before I could react, an incomparably strong wind blew towards me, causing my face to hurt. I instantly felt that something was wrong. I didn't have time to think and instinctively picked up Zhang Canwen and Nangong, who were beside me and threw them far away. After freeing my hands, I directly pushed the little zombie and the mysterious woman in my clothes out as well. Fortunately, even though the sword aura destroyed the barrier surrounding the statue, it was greatly weakened. In the process of the struggle, its speed had completely stopped for a moment, which gave me time to react. However, after doing all of this, I was unable to move my feet, and I didn't have enough time to dodge the sword aura. I could only barely estimate the direction of the sword aura and lay down on the ground. Just as I finished doing all that, the remnant sword light whizzed past my feet. In that moment of imminent peril, other than the accompanying astral wind that made my calf ache, the sword light didn't harm me at all. Before I could rejoice, there was another clear, cracking sound behind me. I quickly turned to see that the remaining sword light had charged towards the statue and hit another barrier. This sword light was indeed quite impressive. With just its remaining power, it was able to completely shatter the second barrier. Moreover, it still had a bit of power left. It slowly moved forward and lightly hit the statue, giving off a muffled sound before completely disappearing. I didn't have the time to investigate why the sound of the sword light hitting the statue was so dull. After dodging a calamity, I quickly turned to look at the location where the priest and the evil sacrificial spirit were fighting. This attack that had used up all of the priest's power was so terrifying that it completely destroyed the two barriers surrounding the statue. What about the sacrificial spirit that was directly hit? Did he perish completely under this sword? I didn't find the answer immediately. The remnant power from the sword was still lingering in the air. The priest and the priest were still fighting in the hall. After waiting for 10 minutes, the flying debris finally disappeared. After waiting for another 5 minutes, the flying dust gradually settled, and the silhouettes of the two parties fighting in the distance finally appeared in my field of vision. At first glance, I saw the sacrificial spirit. According to my prediction, the sacrificial spirit's entire body would crumble and turn into a splattering of flesh. In the end, there wouldn't even be a corpse left. However, the truth was the complete opposite. The sacrificial spirit was still standing at its original position. In fact, it didn't seem to be injured at all. At that moment, its back was facing me, so I couldn't see the exact situation. However, only one of its legs was intact, and only half of its arm was missing. The large hole in its abdomen was also clearly visible. However, those injuries were caused by the first attack of the priest's sword and had nothing to do with this attack. How could this be? I glanced at the heavenly masters. There were 11 of them in total, but not a single one of them could sit. Everyone's faces were extremely pale, and half of them had already fainted. The ones who were barely conscious had extremely weak auras, and there wasn't even the slightest bit of Tao Qi coming from their bodies. I couldn't understand it. There were 11 celestial masters, and 8 of them were young god celestial masters. They had used up all of their power and cut off their future path of cultivation to launch such a shocking attack. Why didn't it cause any damage to the evil sacrificial spirit? Why? I was bewildered and didn't know what to do. I could only stare blankly in front of me. Not long after, the evil sacrificial spirit's body moved a little. It was completely different from its previous speed. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to be unharmed like it seemed. Its body twisted for a long time before it continued to limp forward at an extremely slow speed. I knew that it was going to kill those priests. I wanted to do something, but I quickly suppressed the impulse in my heart. Although the sacrificial spirit was moving very slowly, as if it was badly injured, with its cultivation base, even if it only had a wisp of power left, it wasn't something I could deal with. If I rushed forward, it would be no different from sending myself to my death. Moreover, those priests were also my enemies. Their lives weren't important to me. Of course, the most important thing was that the sacrificial spirit didn't seem to have any evil intentions towards me. I had no reason to provoke it. At this time, I found another piece of good news. There's a big hole in the ground not far from the group of celestial masters. It should be the place where the celestial master sword had hit the ground. It had created a big hole. This time, I had an escape route. As long as the sacrificial spirit didn't attack me and solve the problem of my inability to move my feet, I would have a chance to escape. What was even better was that the priest group didn't have a trace of fighting power. I had also resolved the danger I had been in. That was why I wasn't in a hurry. I took a deep breath and stood at my spot, waiting in silence. Soon after, the evil sacrificial spirit came to the group of heavenly masters. It was different from what I had imagined. He didn't kill anyone. He simply grabbed the ankle of the heavenly master closest to him and slowly turned around. Then, he dragged the heavenly master back to me. When he turned around, I could finally see his face. At first glance, I found that his appearance hadn't changed at all. There were no new wounds on his body. However, the two big eyes above his head that had been hovering above his eye sockets were gone. Only an ugly, rotten head was left. I didn't know what it meant, but I could guess that he had used his two eyeballs to block the earth-shattering attack. While I was thinking, the sacrificial spirit dragged the priest's body to me and piled it with the other 7 priest corpses. I looked at the celestial master. His eyes were open, but he was lying on the pile of corpses, not moving at all. I knew very well that he had used up all of his Tao Qi and origin power. Right now, he had no strength at all. He couldn't even crawl out of the pile of corpses. When I turned to look at him, the heavenly master also turned to look at me, his eyes meeting mine. His eyes looked like he was begging for something. I didn't know what he was begging for. Of course, no matter what he was begging for, I couldn't help him. I had a strange feeling in my heart. Just a few hours ago, this person was still the high and mighty young god, celestial master of Mount Longhu. He was with the people of the Metaphysics Association and was not far from me. Occasionally, he would glance at me with cold and disdainful eyes. After just a few hours, there was only such a humble plea left in his eyes. After looking at each other for a while, I retracted my gaze and squatted on the ground. I tried to move my feet while thinking about my next move. The sacrificial spirit didn't look fast, but it didn't take long for him to bring the remaining 11 priests' corpses to me and the statue. He still hadn't killed the 11 people. He just sat cross-legged not far from me. Without the 2 bright eyes on his head, the evil sacrificial spirit only had 2 black eye sockets. I couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. However, sitting so close to me made me feel restless. At the same time, I felt like I was being watched. Since I was so nervous, I didn't dare to do anything else. I could only wait in silence. I didn't know what the sacrificial spirit was going to do next. I didn't know what I was going to do either. While I was waiting, time was so slow that it was suffocating. Nangong, Zhang Kanwen, and the others, who I had pushed aside, didn't dare to move either. They just stood there like clay statues, waiting for time to pass. I didn't know how much time had passed, but Zhang Kanwen suddenly clutched the wound on his chest and slowly got up. His wounds had recovered a little, and he could barely stand up. However, the pressure from the priest's Tao energy had hurt him again. At this moment, he could barely get up. I was afraid that his actions would enrage the evil sacrificial spirit. So, I turned around to look. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to notice him. He was still sitting cross-legged, and his body didn't move at all. Zhang Kinwen seemed to have made up his mind to come to me. He gritted his teeth, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He crawled and moved slowly to my side. During the whole process, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't react. When he was in front of me, I lowered my head and asked, "What do you want to do?" Zhang Kinwen didn't answer me. Instead, he looked at the evil sacrificial spirit and whispered into my ear, "What do you want to do?" I shook my head and told him that I couldn't move my feet. Then I said, "We can only wait. I'll try to figure out why I can't move my feet. As for the rest, we can only leave it to fate." Zhang Kanwen shook his head and whispered into my ear, "We can't. The evil sacrificial spirit has killed so many people. Eventually, it will kill everyone here. We have to do something." This time, Zhang Kanwen didn't wait for me to refute him. He continued, "Do you remember that I told you that my sect has a secret technique to kill this evil spirit?" I was startled. After witnessing the fierce battle between the priest's group and the evil sacrificial spirit, I was amazed by the evil, sacrificial spirit's terrifying power. I didn't remember what Jean Canwin had told me. Instinctively, I asked, can your sect's secret technique really kill this evil spirit? Even if it can, you don't have any Tao energy in your body. I'm afraid you can't use your sect's secret technique, right? Jean Canwin nodded and said with certainty, my sect has been passed down for thousands of years, just for this day. Of course, it can kill this evil spirit. Also, it's true that I can't use my sect's secret technique. But who says that I'm the only one who can use it? Chapter 380. Jean Canwin nodded without hesitation. That's right. I don't have any Tao energy in my body, and it's the same for the Heavenly Masters. Only you can use your cultivation, so only you can do this. My heart was in turmoil, and I couldn't speak for a long time. According to the Heavenly Masters, the sacrificial evil spirit had the cultivation of Xiaju. Although I didn't know what realm this Xiaju cultivation was, he could defeat a dozen Heavenly Masters with just a lift of his hand. In my eyes, this kind of cultivation wasn't far from that of a deity. Now he wanted me to kill him? Before I could react, Jean Canwin hurriedly said, Zhou Yi, I know this is dangerous. I should have done it myself, but I have no choice but to ask you. Hearing his words, I sighed and nodded. I can try. What exactly should I do? Jean Canwin glanced at the sacrificial evil spirit, then whispered to me, you said before that although you cultivate shaman energy, you still have Tao energy in your body, right? The technique passed down by my master can only be activated with Tao energy. I nodded. That's right, but my Tao energy cultivation is only at the 10th acupoint. Now that my heaven meridian is sealed, I can only use Tao energy at the 7th acupoint. 7th acupoint? Then there's no problem. Jean Canwin let out a long sigh of relief and hastily took out something from his body and handed it to me. Then he said in a low voice, this is a secret technique passed down by my sect. It's different from the technique I used to expel the evil spirit that day. I don't need to use my cultivation to deal with the evil spirit. Instead, I need to use this secret technique and an 8 trigrams compass of King, one to activate the power of the sacrificial hall and suppress it. I lowered my head to look. What Jean Canwin passed me was a circular compass with a typical 8 trigrams pattern carved on it. However, the position of the 8 trigrams was different from the pre-celestial 8 trigrams. It was the King Win's 8 trigrams that he had mentioned. King Win's 8 trigrams was also called the post-celestial 8 trigrams. It was said that King Win of Zhou had derived it from the pre-celestial 8 trigrams in the chapter The Emperor Came Out of Quaking from the pre-celestial 8 trigrams. That was why later generations called it the King Win's 8 trigrams. After a quick glance, I took the initiative to ask how to use this compass. Jean Canwin immediately read a short incantation to me. Then he said, as long as your voice contains Tao energy and recite this incantation, then pour your Tao energy into the 1 King 8 trigrams diagram. It will be fine. The steps were simple. With my memory, it wasn't hard to memorize the incantation he had just chanted. However, I felt that it wasn't real. An evil sacrificial spirit with such a terrifying cultivation base could be dealt with so easily. As if seeing through my thoughts, Jean Canwin said to me solemnly, the method isn't hard, but you have to be careful. You can't make a single mistake in this step. I don't know why this evil spirit isn't attacking us right now, but once we use my sect's secret technique, it will definitely be able to sense it. We only have one chance. If we fail and anger this evil spirit, the consequences will be unimaginable. He didn't need to tell me that. I understood that. After pondering for a while, I clenched my teeth. Since it had come to this, I had no choice but to try everything I could. After making up my mind, I didn't hesitate and silently recited the incantation Jean Canwin had just told me. After confirming that it was correct, I took a deep breath and tightly held the compass in my right hand. Then, I carefully circulated the Tao energy in my body. I divided a small portion of it into my roar and raised my head to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. I I raised my voice and began to recite the incantation. The Tao of man is sentient and trustworthy, incorporeal and formless. It can be transmitted, but it can't be received, but it can't be seen. It has its own origin without the heaven and earth. It has existed since ancient times. Gods, ghosts, gods, and emperors are born in the heaven and earth. They are before the Tai Chi, but they are not high. They are below the six extremes, but they are not deep. They are born in the heaven and earth, but they are not old. The Baiwei clan obtained it to control the heaven and earth. The Fuxi clan obtained it to attack the mother of Qi. As I recited the incantation, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the hall. It seemed to come from ancient times, carrying with it the decaying aura of time as it constantly brushed past me. Just as Zhang Canwen had said, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to sense something. Its ugly and sluggish body slightly moved, slowly standing up from the ground. I held my breath, but I couldn't turn back now. I tried to calm my emotions, but I couldn't help but speed up the incantation. Fortunately, the evil spirit didn't make any further moves. It just stood in front of me and gazed at me with its empty eye sockets. Fear wasn't something that people could control. Since my breathing had quickened, I was worried that I would make a mistake while reciting the incantation. I closed my eyes and didn't look at the evil spirit. I focused my mind on the incantation. Zhang Canwen was right. I only had one chance. If something went wrong, there would be no way to save it. Slowly, I recited the last part of the incantation, and my frightened mood gradually calmed down. While reciting the last few lines of the incantation, I carefully manipulated the Tao energy in my body and slowly circulated it toward the 1 King 8 trigrams diagram. The heaven is selfless, and the earth is selfless. How could the heaven and earth be poor for me? Those who seek it will not be able to obtain it. However, when you reach the extreme, your life is yours. After the last line of the incantation, the Tao energy I had prepared immediately surged toward the 1 King 8 trigrams diagram. Although Zhang Canwen had told me that my 7 apertures acupoint cultivation base was enough to activate the compass, I wasn't so confident that I didn't dare to hold back. After pouring all of my Tao energy into the compass, I had completed all the steps Zhang Canwen had told me. Now, whether I lived or died, it was up to the heavens. When I opened my eyes, my first reaction was to look at the compass in my hand. At this moment, the 8 trigrams diagram of King One was emitting a dusky aura that covered all the diagrams on it. Even though I was holding it in my hand, I couldn't see it clearly. At the same time, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't do anything. I turned to ask Zhang Canwen what was going to happen next. However, before I could open my mouth, my right hand suddenly felt hot. The compass exploded in the air. The explosion of the compass wasn't that powerful. It was about the same as the firecrackers I had played with when I was young. With my current strength, it wouldn't cause any harm. However, it still scared me. I didn't have the time to ask Zhang Canwen, so I lowered my head to look at the compass. A small stone the size of a grain of rice flew out of the exploding compass. It followed the shock wave of the explosion and flew up, hovering in the air. At this moment, the breeze that had appeared when I read the incantation moved toward the stone. When the two forces met, the stone grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a blink of an eye, it had grown from the size of a grain of rice to the size of a thumb. Then, the enlarged stone circled twice in the air. It was so light that it didn't look like a stone at all. Instead, it looked like a bird. As the stone circled around, it looked like it was searching for something. Soon, it seemed to have found its target. It fell straight down and landed right on top of the evil, sacrificial spirit's head. There was no skull or brainstem on top of the evil priest-spirit's head. There were only some things that looked like pieces of rotten wood. The thumb-sized stone seemed to be quite heavy. After it fell, it seemed to sink into those things and disappeared. I lifted my head to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He was still standing there. He didn't show any sign of panic. His empty eye sockets were still gazing at me. I muttered under my breath. Why didn't he react? Did the stone have no effect? I suppressed my worry and waited for around 10 minutes. Gradually, I found that something was wrong with the evil, sacrificial spirit. He seemed to have faded a little. That's right, this evil spirit had come into direct contact with me before. I clearly knew that he wasn't an incorporeal body like Tong Tong. But now, his body looked like a shadow. At first, I wasn't so sure. However, as time passed, his body became fainter and fainter. Eventually, I could even see the ground behind him. Zhang Canwen and I glanced at each other. We both heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the secret technique of Mount Wen's lineage had worked. Around half an hour later, the evil sacrificial spirit's body had faded to the extreme. Inside the shadow above his head, I could see a fist-sized stone. This stone looked different from the other small stones. It was dark brown and didn't look magical at all. It looked like an ordinary stone. All of a sudden, it fell from the sky. After rolling twice, it stopped moving. Chapter 381. Everything went smoothly. From the beginning to the end, the evil spirit didn't retaliate. Apart from standing up, he didn't move at all. He didn't resist at all. After his figure completely disappeared, Zhang Canwen exhaled deeply. His hands that were supporting him on the ground seemed to have lost their strength, and he lay on the ground again. I sat there in a daze. I had a surreal feeling in my heart. Did I really kill the sacrificial evil spirit? I lifted my head and looked around. After I couldn't find that terrifying figure, I finally confirmed my suspicions. I relaxed a little, but I wasn't ecstatic. Instead, I had an indescribable feeling. Although I saw the sacrificial evil spirit kill many heavenly masters with my own eyes, he has never harmed me since I came into contact with him. Now that I think about it, I only have one memory of him. He was standing in front of me, looking at me blankly. It was as if he was thinking about something in his pitch-black eye sockets. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had lost something. However, I quickly tossed these heavy thoughts to the side. Now that the evil sacrificial spirit had been killed by me, the remaining 11 teachers were like defenseless children lying beside me. At this moment, there was no longer anyone who could threaten me in the spring sacrifice hall. The only problem now was the strange power under my feet. As long as I could find a way to get rid of that power, I would be able to escape. I turned to look. Nangong was sitting not far from me. He was looking at me with a strange smile on his face. I was already used to his strange behavior, so I didn't mind it. I asked him if he had any solution to the problem of not being able to move my feet. Nangong didn't answer me. Instead, he got up from the ground and slowly walked to my side. He lowered his head and walked one round around me. Then he shook his head. I don't see any power binding your feet. It seemed that he didn't have a solution. Feeling helpless, I asked him to go and take care of Zhang Canwen. Then I called the little zombie over and asked him to hug my legs. I wanted him to try pulling on them. The little zombie was the strongest existence at the moment. As I didn't have any other solution, I could only try to use brute force. In the end, he almost tore my legs off, but my feet didn't move at all. This stupid method didn't work. I was at my wit's end. I could only sit down cross-legged and close my eyes to regulate my breathing. I circulated the shaman energy in my body and the pure black energy that I had absorbed from the blood sacrifice cave in an attempt to break the seal on the veins of the heaven. Without the threat of the heavenly master, I didn't need to worry about breaking the seal. I decided to use all the dark air I had absorbed in the blood sacrifice cave. Originally, I had already sensed that the black smoke contained an enormous amount of shaman energy. Now that I was controlling it with all my strength, I could feel how terrifying the black smoke was. My current cultivation level is roughly at the peak of the glorious 4 stars. There are 4 witchcraft chi source stones at the bottom of the heaven vein. These 4 dawn stones contain all the shaman chi in my body. If I can channel the shaman chi out of the dawn stone, I can easily fill up my entire heaven vein. Due to the existence of the seal, the black smoke that I had absorbed couldn't enter the heaven vein and could only be stored in the 8 extraordinary meridians. The volume of the 8 extraordinary meridians was only a tenth of the heaven vein. However, After sensing it carefully, I could feel that the power contained in the black smoke in the 8 extraordinary meridians was more than 10 times that of all the shaman energy in my body. In other words, the density of the shaman energy contained in the black smoke was at least 100 times that of the heaven vein. It should be known that the shaman energy that I had cultivated was directly absorbed from the Tai Sui. The power contained in the strange black smoke was more than 100 times that of the shaman energy surrounding the Tai Sui. It was simply terrifying. In the cultivation level of the glorious consciousness realm, the growth of the shaman energy would roughly double with every increase in star. According to this ratio, as long as I could absorb all the black smoke, my cultivation level would be able to reach the peak of the glorious 6 stars, or even complete the glorious 7 stars. As I pondered over these questions, the seal on the heaven vein loosened under the effects of the black smoke and the shaman energy in my body. In the end, under the combined attack of the two, a crisp sound came from my chest. I had finally broken through the seal. When I opened my eyes again, Nangong was sitting next to me. He was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. He seemed to be cultivating as well. However, the moment I opened my eyes, he opened his eyes as well. He smiled and asked me, "How is it?" After I briefly explained the situation to him, I asked him how it was. Nangong shook his head, as though he wasn't willing to say much. He only vaguely told me that the seal in his body was rather troublesome and hadn't been removed yet. Then, he pointed at the group of Heaven's Masters not far away, and asked me, "How do you intend to deal with them?" Hearing his words, I was stunned. Deal with them? Only then did I react. The current situation seemed to have been completely reversed. Originally, I was the meat on the chopping block, and the Heaven's Masters were the meat on the chopping block. But now, I was the meat on the chopping block, and they were the meat on the chopping block. If I wanted to kill them, the 11 Heaven's Masters who were struggling at death's door could only die helplessly without any ability to resist. I hesitated for a moment as I couldn't make up my mind. I turned to ask Nangong for his opinion. In the end, he smiled at me and told me that it was my problem and he didn't care. It was up to me if I wanted to kill them or let them go. Even though the evil sacrificial spirit had died in my hands, I still couldn't make up my mind to kill 11 Heaven's Masters in one go, including 8 young God Celestial Masters. After pondering for a moment, I shook my head at Nangong and said non-committally, "I still can't move, so there's no point in thinking about it. Let's talk about it after I resolve my crisis." Nangong nodded and didn't comment on what I had said. Just as I was preparing to think of a way to deal with the unknown power that was coiling around my feet, an extremely loud bell sound was suddenly heard from the spring sacrifice hall. This bell sound was much stronger than the previous one. However, since my cultivation had already recovered, I didn't feel as uncomfortable as the previous few times. When I heard the bell sound, I instinctively raised my head to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. But after I raised my head, I remembered that the evil, sacrificial spirit had already been killed by me. The previous few times when the bell sounded, the evil, sacrificial spirit would immediately react. Even though he was already dead, who knew if there would be any other abnormal situations? Thus, I didn't dare to be negligent as I held my breath and stayed vigilant. After 5 to 6 minutes, there was no movement in my surroundings. Only then did I relax. I tried to move my feet again. This time, I didn't even have time to activate the shaman energy in my body. I lifted my feet and left the ground. Previously, every time I tried to lift my feet with all my might, they wouldn't move at all. Subconsciously, I used a lot of strength to lift my feet. This sudden change caused my body to tremble, and I almost fell to the ground. After I came back to my senses, I suddenly jumped to stabilize my body. After that jump, I finally came back to my senses. The power that had previously trapped me had completely disappeared. This strange power left as quickly as it came. Moreover, there were no signs of it at all. I didn't even notice when I was trapped and when I escaped. After confirming that I was free, I immediately lowered my head and carefully looked at the place where I was standing. However, no matter how I looked, it was just an ordinary spot on the ground. There wasn't anything strange about it. However, it wasn't the time to get to the bottom of it. I quickly gave up on studying that power. I stood up and exhaled. I started to think about my next move. At this moment, Niangong also noticed that I was free. He also stood up and smiled. What do you plan to do next? I didn't reply to him and directly turned to walk towards the group of Heaven's Masters. To be more precise, I was walking towards Lu Ziyang. To be honest, I hated all the Heaven's Masters of the Metaphysics Association. However, I was still a little worried about killing President Gu and the others. After all, the old president was still around. I could not consider this point. However, there was one person that wasn't in my consideration. Lu Ziyang, Lu Jinyang's grandfather. He was the head of the Lu family who had an irreconcilable grudge against me. Chapter 382. After exhausting all their power, half of the Heaven's Masters were still unconscious. Lu Ziyang was also one of them. I didn't care about the others and walked over to kick Lu Ziyang awake. At that moment, President Gu suddenly spoke and asked me with a cold expression, "Zhou Yi, what are you doing?" "What am I doing?" I temporarily stopped and smiled at him. As the president of the Metaphysics Association, you should have heard that Lu Jinyang colluded with Lu Zining to kill my parents, right? President Gu frowned and went silent for a moment before replying, "I have heard about it, but this is a personal grudge between you and the Metaphysics Association. It's not good for the Metaphysics Association to interfere. What a good, not good for interference." I shook my head and didn't want to talk nonsense with him. I lifted my leg and kicked Lu Ziyang. I didn't use too much force this time. Lu Ziyang's body only moved a little, but he didn't wake up. Without waiting for me to kick him again, President Gu asked me, "Are you trying to vent your anger on Lu Ziyang?" I didn't turn my head and replied indifferently, "I'm not venting. I'm looking for him to collect a debt." "Collect a debt?" President Gu gritted his teeth and stood up. "Every debt has a debtor. The ones who killed your parents are Lu Zining and Lu Jinyang. Why are you looking for Lu Ziyang?" There was no need for me to respond to such unreasonable words. I lifted my leg and kicked Lu Ziyang's back again. I used more force in this kick. Asterisk pung. Asterisk Lu Ziyang's body rolled more than 2 meters away, as if I had kicked a sandbag. He only stopped when he hit another unconscious Heaven's Master. He finally opened his eyes and looked around in shock. It was obvious that his mind was still in a daze. I walked over and dragged his upper body up from the ground. After leaning against the Heaven's Master, I asked him, "Master Lu, do you still remember the grudge between your Lu family and me?" Lu Ziyang's mind still didn't seem to be clear. He raised his head and looked at me. After a while, his pupils finally focused, as if he understood what I said. He instantly frowned and said sternly, "Grudge? What do you want to do?" I smiled at him. "I don't want to do anything. I just want to do to you what Lu Zining did to my parents." Lu Ziyang's expression abruptly changed, and he actually sneered, "You brat, you sure have a big mouth. Although I'm temporarily unable to use my cultivation, casually crushing you to death is still a small matter." He had been unconscious, so unlike President Gu, he hadn't seen me recover my cultivation. At this moment, he clearly thought that my cultivation had been sealed. Without waiting for me to speak, President Gu sighed and said to him, "Brother Lu, Zhou Yi's cultivation has been restored." "What?" Lu Ziyang's sneer instantly froze on his face. He hurriedly asked in disbelief, "What happened? Who released him from the seal?" At this moment, Lu Ziyang finally panicked. President Gu shook his head. "I didn't see anyone release him from the seal, but he has indeed recovered his cultivation." Lu Ziyang's face finally showed a trace of panic, but very quickly he said to me in a threatening manner, "Zhou Yi, let me tell you, although there was a grudge between you and the Lu family didn't kill you. Now, if you take advantage of the situation to attack me, then it will be an irreconcilable situation. Do you really think that the Lu family doesn't have the power to deal with you?" I couldn't help but sneer. The Lu family didn't kill me? They killed my parents, destroyed my cultivation, and broke my meridians. If this isn't killing me, then what is? Could it be that your Lu family and I aren't in an irreconcilable situation? I looked down at Lu Ziang and slowly took out 2 golden talismans. You. He glared at me angrily, but he couldn't say anything. After a moment of silence, the anger on his face disappeared, and he said to me, "The death of your parents was indeed my Lu family's fault, but Zhou Yi, listen to me. The dead can't come back to life. If you kill me, your parents won't be able to come back to life. You have to think about yourself." I didn't say anything, but guided the shaman energy in my hand towards the golden talismans. Although he couldn't use his cultivation, as a celestial master, Lu Ziang could naturally feel the waves of shaman energy in my hand. His expression became more and more panicked, and he hurriedly said to me, "Listen to me. Although you have the identity of a shaman, and the entire metaphysics world wants to get rid of you, it's just a slogan. No one will go all out to kill you. However, if you do anything to me, my Lu family's ancestral hall has my life jade tablet. If I die, the Lu family will know immediately. Also, with my celestial master soul power, it's enough for me to pass on the news to the Lu family. Once that happens, from today onwards, you will have to bear the Lu family's endless pursuit. With your cultivation, it's impossible for you to conceal your identity and hide, let alone escape. My resentment will always entangle you and lead the way for the Lu family until I kill you." I listened to him slowly, but I didn't stop pouring shaman energy into my hand. After he finished, I smiled and asked him, "So, you think I should let you go?" After helping me analyze the pros and cons, Lu Ziang seemed to have recovered a bit of his confidence. He sat up straight and looked at me with a burning gaze. He shook his head and replied, "It's not that you should let me go, but for your own benefit, you can't kill me. After all, you only have one life, while my Lu family has dozens of people. Just counting the cultivation of the heavenly masters, there are also several. The one who killed your parents is my 3rd disciple, Ning. To be honest, if you kill me, you might never have the chance to take revenge for your parents. But if you let me go, you'll at least have some hope." Although I knew that he wasn't a good person, I was still shocked that he hinted to me to kill Lu Ziang to save his own life. I stopped pouring shaman energy into the talismans and examined them carefully. The 2 golden talismans were filled with sufficient Tao energy. With just a thought, I could release their full power. After checking, I smiled at Lu Ziang. "You don't have to worry about how I'm going to take revenge and live. The only thing you have to do now is to think about your unfulfilled wishes. When you use your soul power to send the news of me killing you back to the Lu family, you can also explain it to your descendants." Hearing what I said, Lu Ziang's expression instantly froze. He opened his mouth, as though he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I threw the 2 golden talismans in my hand at him. With a thought, the 2 talismans broke in midair and turned into 2 golden walls of light. They fell from the sky and pressed his body underneath them. The golden talismans were defensive talismans and didn't have any offensive capabilities. Although the 2 walls of light were extremely heavy and sturdy, Lu Ziang had the cultivation of a celestial master, and his physical body was extremely strong. The light walls alone couldn't crush him to death. So, after the light walls pressed down on his body, I stomped and jumped onto the light walls. The light walls couldn't crush him to death, but with my weight, it was naturally impossible. However, I didn't step on it to increase my weight, but to use the astral steps technique. The astral steps technique corresponded to the stars in the sky and stepped on the earth of the mortal world. Every step had a tremendous force, which was much stronger than the power of the astral steps. However, it couldn't be used to defend against enemies because the astral steps had to be connected to the ground. Once it left the ground, the astral steps technique would automatically disappear. This was also the reason why geomasters didn't like to fly. Once they were in midair, they wouldn't be able to communicate with the earth, and the astral steps technique would be useless. At this moment, I didn't have to consider this problem as Lu Ziang was under my feet. When I used the astral steps technique, every bit of force would pass through the light walls created by the golden talismans and reach his body. Chapter 383. The light wall created by the golden light talismans was extremely sturdy. After I took 5 steps, the 2 golden light walls didn't deform at all. This meant that the power of the 5 steps had been transferred to Lu Ziang, who was underneath the light wall. It was different from what I had imagined. Lu Ziang didn't scream at first. It was quiet underneath the light wall. There was no sound. Could it be that he was crushed to death that easily? I was slightly astonished. After completing the 5 steps, I jumped down from the light wall. When I bent down to take a look, I saw that Lu Ziang, who was below the light wall, was wrapped in a white light screen. Although the white light screen was slightly deformed due to the pressure, it still protected his body. From his panicked, but not painful expression, he didn't receive any injuries from the 5 steps of the astral dipper. I had seen this white light wall many times on the Lu family members. It should be a protective magic tool that the Lu family had. When I decided to kill Lu Ziang, it wasn't that I didn't consider the possibility of him having a defensive artifact on him. However, I originally thought that this kind of defensive artifact would have limited power. With Lu Ziang's cultivation, carrying such an artifact on him would be useless. So, I speculated that it was unlikely for him to carry it. I hadn't thought that a heavenly master would be so cautious as to have such a protective magic tool. From its effect, the power of his protective magic tool wasn't bad. It was much stronger than the one I had seen on Lu Qingping's body. It should be a top-grade magic tool, which was why it could block the 5 steps. I didn't mind. Although this defensive artifact was powerful, any artifact had to be supported by power. It was impossible to store too much energy just by relying on the artifact itself. Lu Ziang had lost all his cultivation, so how long could he last with this defensive artifact? I had only used the astral steps once, but the white light wall was already deformed from the pressure. I had an abundance of witchcraft energy in my body. It wouldn't be a problem to use the astral steps 10 times. Even if my witchcraft energy was used up, there was still a large amount of black energy in my meridians. After converting it into witchcraft energy, it would be 10 times stronger than my current witchcraft energy. In other words, I could use the astral steps another 100 times without a problem. Lu Ziang wanted to use this last method to escape. It seemed that this magic tool couldn't save his life. It would only torture him a little longer. After thinking it through, I sneered coldly and stepped on the light wall for the 2nd time. I used the 5 astral steps again. After the glory of consciousness realm, the astral step method was greatly related to the increase of one's cultivation. To increase one's cultivation, one had to study the astral step method. Similarly, as long as one became more familiar with the astral step method, the increase of one's cultivation would be a matter of time. At this moment, a large amount of black air was stored in my meridians. After using the astral steps twice, the black air started to transform into shaman energy, condensing and settling in my body. After completing 2 rounds of astral steps, I lowered my head to take a look. There was only a thin layer of white light left around Lu Ziang's body. His face was extremely pale. There was no longer any resentment, only despair and pleading. Perhaps it was because he noticed that I was checking his condition. Lu Ziang shouted at me, "Zhou, don't kill me. As long as you let me go, I'll immediately hand over the murderer of your parents to you after we leave this place. How about it? And I guarantee that the Lu clan will never hunt you down in the future. We'll mind our own business. If you're still not satisfied, tell me your conditions, and I'll agree to anything. If you don't believe me, I can swear on my Tao heart." The current Lu Ziang no longer had his previous arrogance. He didn't even have the dignity of a heavenly master. In order to survive, he was as lowly as a stray dog, just like how my mother had knelt in front of Lu Zining and begged bitterly. They had both thrown away their dignity, but the difference was that Lu Ziang was begging for mercy for himself, while my mother was begging for me. A tyrannical thought surged up from the bottom of my heart. I took a deep breath and didn't respond to him at all. I lifted my foot and stepped on the light wall again, using another round of astral steps. This time, a tragic howl finally came from below the light wall. Lu Xiang's defensive artifact should have lost its power by now. The terrifying power of the astral steps completely crushed his body. At this moment, he could probably feel the pain that my parents felt at that time, right? The screams sounded as if Lu Xiang was going to die in the next second. However, I knew how strong a heavenly master's physical strength was. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the protective artifact that I had used 3 rounds of astral steps to crush might not be as strong as his physical strength. At this moment, Lu Xiang was far from dying. He only felt pain, that's all. So, this time, I didn't stop to observe the situation. After 1 round, I immediately started the next round. I kept on using the astral steps, and the black energy in my body was constantly changing and breaking down. It turned into a large amount of shaman energy that was scattered in the veins of the sky. So, the more I used the astral steps, the more shaman energy there was in my body. Moreover, as I used the astral steps many times, my understanding of the 9-star heavenly dipper became deeper and deeper. Finally, after the 4th round of astral steps, I suddenly understood something. This understanding couldn't be described with words, but there was a feeling of good fortune telling me that I could use the 6th step of the 9-star heavenly dipper. The 5th time I used the astral steps, I didn't stop at the 5th step. I continued to lift my foot and use the 6th step. The 6th step of the 9-star heavenly dipper was called Mizar. The power of this step was only slightly stronger than the 5th step. However, the difference was that Mizar only relied on the 2 stars. The power of the 2 stars was extraordinary. Mizar was affected by the 2 stars and also had the power of the netherworld. It was this netherworld power that caused the power of the Mizar star to increase greatly. The result of the 9-star heavenly dipper was that the power of the 6th step was much stronger than the 5th step. It was even stronger than the previous 5 steps combined. After I used the 6th step, a large amount of shaman energy instantly gathered at the bottom of my meridians of heaven. At a speed visible to the naked eye, it formed a new shaman energy origin stone. Furthermore, this shaman energy origin stone was much bigger than the previous 4. The formation of the 5th shaman energy origin stone signified that my cultivation had officially reached the glorious memory, 5-star, and the glorious memory. 5-star meant the glorious memory late stage. After the glorious memory realm, it was extremely difficult to take another step. Many people might not even be able to take this step even after several years. However, with the black energy that I had coincidentally obtained in my current furious state of mind, I managed to successfully take this step. I wasn't really excited. I wasn't thinking about how much my cultivation would increase after entering the late stage of glorious memory. Instead, the first thing I thought about was that the power of the 6th step should be much stronger than before, right? Could Lu Xiang, who was beneath the light wall, hold on? Just as that thought appeared in my mind, the cries under the light wall stopped. What replaced it was the sound of someone exhaling. When a normal person exhaled, even if they purposely did so, they wouldn't make a loud sound. However, this sound was really loud and lasted for a long time. It was as if there was an endless amount of energy in Lu Xiang's stomach, causing him to exhale continuously. After more than a minute, the sound of exhalation finally stopped. There was no longer any sound of life under the wall of light. I jumped down from the top and didn't look down. I waved my hands, and the 2 golden light talismans that formed a light wall dissipated under my will. Lu Xiang's tattered body was finally revealed. Just as I thought, the current Lu Xiang had become a paper man. Or rather, I could remove the word man. He had become a piece of paper. Fresh blood and rotten flesh that was squeezed out seeped out from every crack of his body. Anyone who saw such a scene would think that they were in hell and would have goosebumps. As the instigator of all this, I didn't feel disgusted, only sad. Although my parents' corpses weren't in such a terrible state, they were just normal people. The pain they suffered wouldn't be any less than what Lu Xiang suffered, right? I turned around and shook my head. I tried my best not to think about such things and turned my gaze towards Leader Gu. Chapter 384. I looked at President Gu and couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. When I first met him at the Metaphysics Association's headquarters, he stood on the high platform and looked at us young people with the eyes of an old senior. At that time, he was like a tall mountain that stood in front of me. I couldn't even see where the mountain was, and I didn't dare to have the thought of standing shoulder to shoulder with him. But now, everything seemed to be different. Looking at the restlessness and shock in President Gu's eyes, I suddenly felt that the Celestial Master wasn't so high and mighty. In the metaphysics world, the Celestial Master didn't just represent a high cultivation, but also an identity that transcended ordinary people. The specific manifestation of this identity was a bit vulgar. Celestial Master could fly. This fly wasn't just a metaphor, but a real ability. I had experienced it personally when Yin Nanshan's Yang God took me dozens of meters into the sky to avoid the sacrificial evil spirit. When a person could fly in the sky, perhaps they couldn't simply be called a person anymore. Thus, the meaning of the Celestial Master completely transcended itself and represented a special meaning. Although my cultivation is still far from that of a Celestial Master, at the very least, I seem to be able to see that mountain peak. Moreover, I also have the courage to climb that mountain peak in my heart. As I thought about these questions, I smiled at President Gu and didn't say anything. I turned and walked towards Nangong and Zhang Kanwen. Perhaps it was because the method I used to kill Lu Ziang was too cruel, but Zhang Kanwen looked at me with a blank gaze when he saw me walking over. Zhang Kanwen knew the cause of my parents' death, so I didn't mention it again. I directly said to Nangong, "There's a hole in the ground over there. We should be able to leave this place after jumping in. Your cultivation hasn't recovered yet. The little zombie and I could take the two of you away." Nangong obviously didn't care about the method I used to kill Lu Ziang. He only smiled and didn't reply. Instead, he asked, "Have you decided to let those Celestial Masters go?" I nodded. Although the entire metaphysics world was my enemy, it was just like what Lu Ziang had said. In reality, there wasn't a force that would chase after me relentlessly. Whether it was the old president or Celestial Master Zhang, they were both things that I had to consider. If I really went on a killing spree with their cultivation, there was no way they wouldn't be able to find out. At that time, if the two of them wanted to kill me, I might really die without a burial place. Nangong smiled again. It was obvious that he wasn't surprised by my decision. Since we've decided to let them go, there's no point in staying here. You guys can leave now. I can't leave for the time being. I was stunned. What? Nangong shook his head and said, "When I first came in, I said that I came here to find something, but I haven't found it yet. But you've lost all of your cultivation. If you stay here." Halfway through my sentence, I saw the mysterious smile on Nangong's face and suddenly came to a realization. Could it be that your cultivation has recovered? Nangong nodded noncommittally. I haven't fully recovered yet, but I should be able to protect myself. His answer shocked me. The seal that the Metaphysics Association had placed on him was completely different from mine. The seal that I had placed on him was something that a Celestial Master had casually placed on him, while the seal that he had placed on him was something that the old president had personally instructed him to do. I couldn't help but look at him in shock. Nangong's cultivation wasn't as simple as that of an ordinary Celestial Master if he could break the seal that the old president had personally instructed him to do. Although I was shocked, this guy's whereabouts had always been secretive. I wasn't surprised that he wanted to stay here. Moreover, his cultivation had recovered, so I didn't have anything to worry about. I nodded and simply asked if he needed us to wait for him outside. After getting a negative answer, I called the little zombie and Zhang Kanwen to leave. However, I couldn't make up my mind when I saw the woman standing next to Zhang Kanwen. Should I take her with me? She looked exactly like Yi Piampian and was said to be the key. If I want to clear up my doubts, taking her with me would be the best choice. However, I was hesitant. Just now, Mount Longhu and the Taoist Association had used up 20 years of their lifespan to snatch this woman. The other side had even taken out the Celestial Master Sword. This showed how precious this woman was. The appearance of a Celestial Master Sword meant that Celestial Master Zhang was behind their actions. If I took this woman with me, wouldn't I offend Celestial Master Zhang? While I was pondering, Nangong seemed to have noticed my hesitation. Do you want to take her with you? I didn't hide anything from him, so I didn't say anything and just nodded. Nangong shook his head. If you want to take her with you, why don't you go there and kill all the celestial masters? I was bewildered as I couldn't think of a reason. Nangong didn't wait for me to think and continued. This woman is very important to Mount Longhu. She's much more important than the 3 celestial masters. I understood now. He was worried about Mount Longhu's attitude, just like what I had been worried about. After a moment of silence, I sighed and decided to give up. Mount Longhu's power wasn't ordinary. I didn't need to make myself an enemy. Moreover, I had just killed Lu Ziang. According to Lu Ziang, from now on, the Lu family wouldn't rest until I was dead. If I had to face the Lu family's crazy revenge and Mount Longhu's enmity, I wouldn't have a chance to live. Nangong heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that I had made a rational decision. He didn't say anything else and just urged me to leave. I carried Zhang Qianwen on my back and called the little zombie. I wanted to leave immediately. However, after I had taken a few steps with Zhang Qianwen on my back, the little zombie didn't follow me. I felt strange. I turned around and saw the little zombie standing behind me. He was looking at something in his hand. It seemed he hadn't heard me. Was it possible that the battle between the celestial masters and the evil sacrificial spirits had affected the little zombie? With this thought, my heart tightened. Although the little zombie had always been quiet, I had been with him for a long time. He was like a family member to me. What's wrong with you? I asked as I turned around and walked back to him. The little zombie didn't answer me. He didn't even lift his head. He was still looking at his hands. When I came closer, I saw that he was holding a stone. I wasn't a stranger to this stone. It was the one Zhang Qianwen had given me to deal with the evil sacrificial spirit. However, after killing the evil sacrificial spirit, the stone had shrunk to the size of a fist. But now, the stone in the little zombie's hand was only the size of a thumb. I didn't understand, so I put Zhang Qianwen down. I wanted to take the stone to study it. However, in just a few seconds, the stone had changed again. It had shrunk to the size of a grain of rice. It was about the same size as when Zhang Qianwen had given it to me. The little zombie's strange behavior and the stone's change made me a little nervous. I didn't dare to take it directly. I decided to observe it for a while. After half a minute, the grain-sized stone had shrunk until it disappeared from the little zombie's hand. What's going on? Before I could figure it out, the little zombie seemed to wake up from his bewildered state. He lifted his head and gazed at me with his big eyes. It was a strange feeling. The little zombie also had a pair of big eyes, but they weren't as big as they were right now. Moreover, the way he looked at me was strange. It was as if he had become a different person. I stared at him for a few seconds. The strange feeling disappeared, and a sense of familiarity emerged. It wasn't because I was familiar with the little zombie, but because his 2 big eyes reminded me of the evil sacrificial spirit. Chapter 385. I couldn't help but shiver. I carefully looked at the little zombie's eyes. The feeling of seeing an evil sacrificial spirit was gone. The little zombie's eyes seemed to have shrunk and returned to their original size. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? I hesitated for a while and stared at the little zombie for a while. I didn't have that feeling again. I shook my head and confirmed that it was just a hallucination. Why didn't you respond when I called you? The little zombie blankly looked at me as if he didn't understand what I meant. From the first time I had met this kid until now, he had been bewildered. I had asked him twice, but he didn't answer me. Feeling helpless, I had to give up and take him out of this place. I asked him to follow me. This time, the little zombie nodded and followed me. We walked toward the hole in the ground. When I reached the entrance of the cave, Nangong told me that when I reached the door that I had entered from, I only needed to hold the shell coin that I had found earlier in my hand and infuse it with my witchcraft energy. Then I would be able to walk out of the invisible door. I nodded and said goodbye to Nangong. Then I held Zhang Qianwen and jumped down from the hole. At this moment, my cultivation had already completely recovered. It wasn't difficult for me to jump a few meters down. After the little zombie and I landed on the ground, I turned around and waved at Nangong, who was standing at the entrance of the cave, before stepping on the path back to the cave. The doors of the sacrificial hall were still open. We didn't have to worry about getting out of the hall quickly. After we got out of the hall, I turned around to check. My heart was still restless. Too many things had happened in this ancient sacrificial hall during the past day. Han Wenan had plotted against them. The Metaphysics Society had captured them. Lu Jianyang had ambushed them. Han Wenan and Lu Jianyang had become the sacrificial offerings for the blood sacrifice cave. They had met the woman who looked exactly like Yi Pianpian. They had witnessed a terrifying battle and killed the evil sacrificial spirit. Then, they had killed Lu Jianyang to take revenge for their parents. I didn't have time to think about all the things that had happened one after another. When I got out of the mysterious ancient sacrificial hall, I couldn't help but sigh. Of course, it wasn't the time to sigh. Zhang Kanwen was still badly injured, and there might be other unknown things in the mysterious tomb of the Shang dynasty. I couldn't stay here any longer. It was better to get out of here. After asking Zhang Kanwen and confirming that my fast movement wouldn't affect his wounds, I sped up. In less than half of the time it took me to arrive at the entrance of the sacrificial hall, I pushed the door open just like last time and arrived in front of the long stone path. When I arrived here, I immediately remembered the murals. However, it was strange that I couldn't find any murals on the square stones. There wasn't even a trace of them. I gawked. I didn't know if I'd seen it wrong before or now. Luckily, I still had some photos on my phone. I took them out and checked. The photos hadn't disappeared. I could confirm that the murals I'd seen earlier were real. Nangong had said that there was something important hidden in the mural. I had planned to take a few clearer pictures on the way back, but now it seemed that I wouldn't be able to. Although I didn't take any more pictures, I was now even more certain that there was something hidden in the murals. Walking along the stone path, I quickly reached the place where we had first arrived. It was pitch black, exactly the same as when I had arrived. I followed Nangong's instructions and easily guided my shaman energy into the shell coin. Then my eyes brightened. When I opened them again, I was already in the ruins of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb. In the absolute darkness of the royal tomb, I didn't have any concept of time. I didn't know how much time had passed outside. However, from the looks of it, it should be daytime outside. There were 4 people standing in front of me. 2 of them were wearing staff uniforms. They should be the staff of the ruins of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb. The other 2 looked like tourists. The 4 of them opened their eyes wide, as if they had seen a ghost. They stared at us. It was an unspoken rule that the metaphysical world didn't want to affect the secular world. I waved my hand, and a wisp of shaman energy appeared out of thin air. It divided into 4 parts and surged towards the 4 people. As I quickly chanted, a spell was attached to the shaman's aura. Very quickly, it entered the eyes of the 4 people and disappeared. Immediately after, the 4 people closed their eyes and fainted. Only then did I hastily leave. The spell I had just used was a low-power spell that could cause amnesia. It simply erased their memories for half an hour. It wouldn't cause any harm to them. If there were 4 people in the deepest part of the royal tomb, there would only be more people in other places. I didn't dare to delay any longer. I used my fastest speed to rush out and return to the surface. Then, I hurried back to the hotel that I had stayed in previously. Many people saw me during this process. However, with my speed, they only saw an afterimage. In the end, they would think that their eyes were playing tricks on them. I didn't mind it. I was still worried about Zhang Kanwen's injuries. After returning to the hotel, I asked him if he wanted to go to the hospital. Although cultivators had strong recovery abilities, for external injuries like Zhang Kanwen's, the hospital was more professional in dealing with them. That was why I asked him. However, Zhang Kanwen shook his head. It's fine as long as he recovers on his own. It's inconvenient to go to the hospital. He insisted that I take him to his room. After settling him down, I was still worried about another matter. When I entered the Shang dynasty's royal tomb, it was the end of the 2nd month of the lunar calendar. The beginning of the month was also the middle of the month when Xiao Jin would transform. At that time, I took him to a remote place nearby and told him to transform and hide there. I told him to wait for me to come out and pick him up. I looked at the time. It was the third day of the third month of the lunar calendar. In other words, I had stayed in the Shang dynasty's royal tomb for 3 days. Xiao Jin was hiding in the wilderness alone. He was probably getting anxious. This matter couldn't be delayed. I had to go and pick him up immediately. I didn't even have time to return to my room. After taking care of Zhang Kanwen, I immediately set off again to the valley where Xiao Jin was staying. Anyang wasn't a prosperous place, but it had a lot of people. There were many populated areas near the city. The valley where Xiao Jin was staying was very far from the city. It was more than 100 kilometers away. After rushing for more than 2 hours, I finally reached the place. I lifted my head and saw that the ravine was in a mess. It was obviously caused by Little Gold's transformation. However, I couldn't see Little Gold's silhouette. I closed my eyes and used my wizard energy to sense. My heart sank. I couldn't see Xiao Jin's aura around. My eyes couldn't see every corner of the valley, but my wizard energy couldn't miss a single spot. In other words, Xiao Jin was gone. I couldn't help but frown. Where'd he go? I hesitated for a while, but I didn't think about the worst. I walked around the valley. During the whole process, I didn't stop and use my wizard energy to sense. I was sure that I had covered the entire mountain range around the valley. However, it was all in vain. After walking around, I still couldn't sense Xiao Jin's aura. At this moment, I finally panicked. Xiao Jin's personality was similar to that of the zombie. They were both silly and simple-minded. I had told him to stay here and wait for me to come out. Logically speaking, he wouldn't go back on his word. But now, he had disappeared. If Xiao Jin didn't run around, it meant that he had encountered some unforeseen event. Anyang City was part of Hunan Province. In the 9 prefectures, Shaanxi and Hunan were the most prosperous places in the world of metaphysics. Although there weren't as many cultivators as there were hairs on an ox, they weren't rare. Could it be that when Xiao Jin transformed, the cultivators nearby sensed him? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.